April 18th, 1961. Joe Simons leaves his house to fetch water and returns with scars that will remain with him for the rest of his life. Between these two moments lie 10 minutes that will change everything. A metal disc in his yard, 3 creatures 5 feet tall, a silent request, an exchange, water for food. And then, pain, a rash, marks on his skin that weren't there an hour ago. The military will call it inexplicable. Doctors will throw up their hands. Laboratories will find anomalies but no answers. And Joe will be left with a question that will destroy his peace of mind forever. What did they do to him while he was holding their strange pancakes? Today we will go through several such stories. Each one is documented. Each one is inexplicable. Each one left traces. At roughly 11 o'clock, Simon's eyes were drawn to a metallic, disc-shaped object descending quietly into his yard. It touched down soundlessly, resting on slender legs. The sunlight danced upon its polished surface, causing it to shimmer like a jewel. The craft measured around 30 feet in diameter, and as Simon observed, a hatch swung open. Inside, he caught sight of 3 figures, each approximately 5 feet tall, cloaked in dark, form-fitting suits. Their features bore a faint resemblance to humans, yet their skin appeared darker and their eyes intensely focused, radiating an unsettling aura. One of the entities made a gesture toward Simon while holding a container aloft. Though no words were exchanged, an unspoken understanding seemed to convey their request for water. Swiftly, he fetched a jug from inside his home and handed it over. In return, they offered him small, pancake-like discs, an apparent offering of food prepared on a metallic grill within the craft. This brief exchange unfolded in mere minutes. The beings exuded no aggression, but their very presence was steeped in strangeness. After relinquishing the food, the hatch sealed closed, and the craft ascended silently, vanishing into the azure sky. Initially, Simon regarded this incident as merely peculiar, a curious story to relay to his neighbors. However, within hours, an unsettling transformation began to occur within him. An unbearable itching plagued his skin, followed by rashes that erupted across his arms. By nightfall, the irritation had escalated, and vivid red patches sprawled over his forearms and chest. In the ensuing days, small scars emerged where the rash had been most pronounced, faint but discernible. Tiny circular marks resembling punctures. Simon maintained that he had never encountered skin issues prior to this incident and directly attributed the sudden onset of irritation to his handling of the objects from the alien craft. He also found himself beset by fatigue and dizziness. The simple act of transporting water to the beings left him feeling inexplicably drained. For a farmer accustomed to rigorous labor, this abrupt weakness created alarming concern. A visit to a local physician revealed skin irritation, yet the cause remained elusive. Subsequently, the pancakes Simon handed over were analyzed by the United States Air Force. Laboratory tests confirmed that they consisted of conventional terrestrial ingredients: flour, wheat germ, and grease. Nonetheless, the rash and scars that adorned Simon's body indicated that something about his contact with the craft or its occupants had triggered a reaction his system struggled to cope with. Mentally, the encounter bore a heavy toll. Initially, Simon spoke candidly, recounting his experience to neighbors and local media. However, as his story circulated, ridicule swiftly followed. Many laughed at the notion of extraterrestrials distributing pancakes. The incident was trivialized in newspapers, reduced to a farcical punchline. Yet beneath the ridicule was a profoundly shaken man. Simon battled embarrassment, depression, and anxiety, repeatedly asserting that he was telling the truth, that the craft had indeed landed, and that the beings had bestowed food upon him. Yet the dual burden of public mockery and his unexplained physical symptoms drove him to withdraw into himself. Nightmares plagued his sleep, visions of the beings looming over him, their dark suits enveloping his bed, their intense eyes penetrating into him. Awakening drenched in sweat, he felt the scars on his arms tingle, as if the memories were permanently inscribed into his skin. Over time, he grew increasingly reticent about discussing the episode, fatigued by the laughter. However, in private conversations with researchers, he admitted that the marks on his body never entirely faded, and that the fatigue lingered for years. The Eagle River incident garnered official attention due to its unusual physical evidence. Investigators from the Air Force's Project Blue Book were dispatched to interview Simon, examine the site, gather food samples, and document statements from local residents. The results of the pancake analysis proved mundane, yet the Air Force classified the case as unknown. They refrained from dismissing it outright as they recognized Simon's sincerity and acknowledged that the rash on his body was a verifiable reality. Nevertheless, the peculiar nature of the exchange, food for water, led them to quietly shelve the case. Yet within the Blue Book files, the Eagle River encounter remained distinctive. Unlike ephemeral lights flitting across the sky, this episode represented a direct interaction, yielding both physical artifacts and effects on the witness. Simon's health continued to decline after that fateful spring day. The rashes eventually receded, but the scars lingered, faint circular impressions lingering on his arms that he later revealed to researchers. He continued to wrestle with fatigue and intermittent dizziness that confounded medical professionals. Psychologically, he bore the weight of ridicule, never retracting his story but becoming increasingly secretive. He confided to researchers that the scars served as enduring reminders, tangible proof etched into his skin of an event that transpired, despite widespread disbelief. The Eagle River encounter remains one of the most peculiar cases in UFO lore. For many, it devolved into mere curiosity, a comical tale of alien pancakes. However, beneath the jest lurked a more profound reality. A man burdened with unexplained marks, rashes, and a lifetime of psychological distress. Joe Simon sought neither fame nor fortune from his experience. He led the remainder of his life in quiet dignity, bearing the scars he insisted resulted from that April morning when a metallic craft came to rest in his yard. For Project Blue Book, the case was archived under the classification of unknown. For researchers, it emerged as a poignant illustration of how even the most bizarre encounters can leave unmistakable evidence. For Joe Simon, this event became an indelible memory etched within both his consciousness and his physical being, a stark reminder that on an ordinary morning in Eagle River, he had crossed paths with beings that hailed from a realm beyond the familiar, leaving behind scars that mockery could never erase. The case of Charles Moody's abduction in 1975, New Mexico, is another riveting chapter in the annals of unexplainable phenomena. On a balmy night, specifically on August 13, 1975, 32-year-old Charles Moody, an airman stationed near Alamogordo, New Mexico, ventured out into the arid desert to relish the spectacle of a meteor shower. This activity was one he frequently indulged in, seeking solace away from the urban glare in favor of the vast, starry expanse that the desert offered. Yet, on this particular night, the cosmos had more in store for him than mere falling stars. What would unfold would leave Moody deeply marked, both in body and psyche, a curious episode that would eventually draw the subdued interest of the military. After parking his vehicle along a desolate stretch of road, he turned off the engine, settling back to admire the meteors that painted the night sky with their trails of light. Approximately 30 minutes passed before he spotted a bright, glowing object advancing from the horizon. This was no meteor. Its motion was purposeful, its speed unyielding, and its path directed squarely toward the desolate patch of land near his car. As the object drew nearer, it became evident to Moody that the craft was a sizable oval, metallic entity, humming softly as it approached. It descended gracefully, hovering no further than 50 feet above the ground, flooding the desert landscape with a radiant white light. An acute pang of fear surged within him, prompting Moody to ignite the engine of his car, but to his dismay, the ignition failed to respond. He then attempted to exit the vehicle, yet as he opened the door and placed his foot on the sand, a peculiar sensation gripped him. His legs stiffened, his arms grew heavy, and within moments, a paralyzing force rendered him immobile. He could perceive his surroundings and hear the sounds around him, yet his body refused to obey his commands. At that juncture, two beings emerged from the craft. They appeared to stand approximately 5 feet tall, with slender frames and unusually large heads. Their dark, expansive eyes seemed to hold a mysterious allure. They approached him with a serene, almost predatory grace, their movements fluid and calculated. One of them gestured with a device, and Moody felt a sudden jolt of vibration surge through his body before everything faded into darkness. When his consciousness returned, he found himself reclined on a metallic table within the craft. The chamber was illuminated brightly, its smooth walls emitting a sterile aura, while a clinical scent permeated the air. He was surrounded by several beings who scrutinized him intently. Describing them, Moody noted their pale gray skin, oversized hairless heads, and elongated arms with slender fingers. With deliberate precision, they maneuvered various instruments across his body, pressing against his arms and torso. One particular device induced a searing sensation on his upper arm, akin to a small incision being made. Despite the sting, he was powerless to vocalize his distress. In his subsequent accounts, Moody revealed that these beings communicated not through the spoken word, but through thoughts, assuring him that he would emerge unscathed. Their claims centered around their interest in human physiology. The examination seemed to last an eternity, yet time inside the craft felt strangely accelerated. He recalled being ushered to another compartment of the ship, a control area adorned with glowing panels featuring intricate symbols that eluded understanding, along with a viewport through which he gazed upon the stars. The beings conveyed that much of the experience would fade from his memory, yet vestiges would linger. Mere moments later, as abruptly as it began, he found himself seated back in his car. The craft ascended into the night sky, disappearing from view. While the meteor shower continued its celestial display above, his body ached and his mind spun in turmoil. The encounter left Moody with distinct physical implications. Most notably, he bore a scar on his upper arm, where he distinctly recalled the burning pain. The mark was thin and circular, resembling the outcome of a surgical instrument, and it remained without explanation as he had not suffered any injury or undergone medical treatment warranting its presence. Its visibility persisted for years thereafter. Alongside the scar, Moody experienced lingering numbness in his legs, which endured for several days. His muscles ached, fatigue settled in easily even after minimal exertion, and he found himself plagued by frequent headaches and bouts of dizziness in the ensuing weeks. Additionally, an unusual sensitivity emerged on his skin, with a tingling sensation that radiated across his arms and back. Doctors he visited offered no conventional rationale, and while noting the scar, they deemed it trifling. For Moody, however, this mark stood as irrefutable proof that something had transpired aboard the craft. The emotional aftermath proved to be even more harrowing. Moody began to suffer from nightmares almost immediately. In these dreams, he was paralyzed, unable to move, with dark-eyed beings encircling him. He awakened in a cold sweat, heart racing, the scar on his arm throbbing as though the very memory could ignite physical pain. He grappled with feelings of anxiety and hyper-awareness. Driving at night became an ordeal. Every light in the sky transformed into a potential threat. His sleep patterns fractured, leaving him irritable and withdrawn. Initially, he endeavored to suppress the recollections, but fragments would intrude into his thoughts. The sensation of levitating, the cold metallic table, the large eyes of his captors, these memories persisted. Ultimately, he sought guidance from abduction researchers who facilitated hypnosis sessions. During these sessions, Moody unearthed additional details concerning the examination and the scar left in its wake. The revelations cemented his fears. What he had recalled was not a mere figment of imagination, but a reality partially concealed from his consciousness. The mental scars expanded, exacerbated by the awareness that his body exhibited tangible evidence of what his mind resisted accepting. The site of Moody's encounter, in the vicinity of Alamogordo, New Mexico, placed it particularly close to Holloman Air Force Base, a pivotal military installation within the southwestern United States. Holloman harbored a history of UFO sightings stretching back to the 1960s, including alleged reports of filmed landings. Moody slowly confided in a select group, and rumors eventually reached local authorities and military personnel. No formal statement was issued. Yet, researchers studying his account observed that military officers discreetly inquired about his testimony. His tenure as an airman bestowed credibility upon his claims, and the scar on his arm was catalogued within the annals of abduction accounts. Although Project Blue Book had officially concluded in 1969, interest from intelligence communities regarding UFO incidents lingered. Given the close proximity of Moody's abduction to Holloman and the physical evidence it yielded, his case would have been challenging to overlook. Documents pertaining to his experience circulated in the realm of private research, and it is widely assumed that summaries of his case infiltrated unofficial government UFO dossiers. As time progressed, Moody's physical health saw improvements. However, the scar on his arm persisted, a permanent reminder of the ordeal. He displayed it to researchers on numerous occasions, stressing its connection to the significant moment aboard the craft. Conversely, his mental well-being bore the brunt of the aftermath. He endured persistent nightmares and anxiety long into his later years. Publicly, he clung steadfastly to his narrative, unwavering in the face of the ridicule that frequently beset those who claimed abduction. The recollection of lying helplessly on a metallic table with beings probing his body and the sharp sting that resulted in the scar remained a haunting presence that he could not escape. He would often declare the scar to be his unyielding reminder, a testament that no one could wrest from him, a proof etched into his skin. The abduction of Charles Moody in 1975 is etched into memory as a quintessential American abduction narrative. It embodied all the essential elements: paralysis, missing time, telepathic communication, and most importantly, physical evidence manifesting as a scar. For Moody, this scar was far more than a mere wound. It symbolized a message. It served as evidence that he had been taken, examined, and marked by forces beyond human comprehension. The nightmares, paranoia, and anxiety manifested as invisible scars intertwined with the visible one. The silence from the government did little to diminish the veracity of his experience that a United States airman near Holloman Air Force Base had reported an abduction, leaving him physically scarred and fundamentally altered. For researchers, his case evolved into a pivotal example of the abduction surge of the 1970s, referenced alongside other notable cases such as Pascagoula and Allagash, demonstrating that abductions resulted in both physical and psychological wounds. For Moody, the experience bifurcated his life into two distinct periods: before that fateful desert night under the meteors, and after, when any glance at his scar served as a reminder that he had once found himself in the grasp of beings who left indelible marks upon his body, mind, and soul. The Valens UFO incident, Maurice, Mass., 1965, France. On the morning of July 1st, 1965, in the modest farming village of Valensole, located in the Alpes-de-Provence region of southern France, lavender farmer Maurice, Mass. Ventured outside to commence another day's labor. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, the air suffused with the aroma of lavender fields sprawling toward the distant hills. Mass was a man of discipline, a veteran of World War II, held in high esteem within his community for his integrity and steadiness. By all accounts, nothing in his life suggested he would be thrust into the epicenter of one of Europe's most well-documented UFO encounters. Yet what he witnessed that morning in the fields would leave him physically depleted, profoundly changed in his psyche, and marked in ways that would linger until the end of his days. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, Mass strolled toward a section of his lavender field when his gaze fell upon something peculiar, roughly 200 feet away. Initially assuming it was a helicopter that had descended into his crops, he soon recognized an unusual egg-shaped craft resting securely among the lavender, supported by slender landing legs. Adjacent to the object were two diminutive beings, estimated to be around 4 feet in height. These entities were attired in fitted suits characterized by large heads and strikingly almond-shaped eyes. Mass later recounted that they resembled humanoids yet were distinctly not human. Their movements were swift and precise, and their expressions remained serene yet inscrutable. As he drew closer, the beings turned their attention toward him. One of them raised a compact device and aimed it in his direction. In an instant, Mass found himself immobilized, his body rendered motionless. Paralyzed and unable to summon the slightest movement, he remained acutely aware of his surroundings. The beings observed him briefly before retreating to their craft, which then ascended soundlessly into the atmosphere and disappeared. Moments later, Mass regained control over his body. Yet, it was evident that something fundamental had altered, not solely in his perception, but within his very being. The immediate impact of the paralysis ray was significant. Mass felt drained, as if his energy had been siphoned away completely. His limbs turned heavy, and his breathing became labored. During the ensuing hours, he endeavored to return to his work, only to discover himself fatigued after a mere few minutes of labor. As days turned into weeks, the exhaustion intensified. He found it challenging to remain awake. Sometimes dozing off mid-conversation or collapsing after undertaking modest physical activities. His family grew increasingly worried. The once vigorous and active Mass now appeared a man aged beyond his years, vitality seemingly stripped from him. Medical evaluations yielded no conventional explanations for his condition. His blood pressure remained unusually low, and his skin displayed heightened sensitivity. He reported experiencing a tingling sensation coursing through his body, particularly at the site where the beam had made contact. Sunlight grew more intolerable, and his skin reacted with redness more swiftly than before. Ultimately, Mass's health never fully regained its previous vigor. Although he mustered enough energy to continue with his farming duties, he noted that the sensations of weakness and heightened sensitivity followed him throughout his life. His physical state had been transformed by whatever technology had subdued him that morning. Beyond the corporeal ramifications, the encounter inflicted deep psychological wounds. Though he considered himself a pragmatic individual, not prone to fantasies, he found his thoughts increasingly consumed by the incident. Recurring dreams haunted him, featuring the beings with their penetrating eyes fixed upon him, their ominous device raised. Friends and neighbors began to notice a change in his personality. Once affable and vibrant, he grew more reserved, introspective, and subdued. His wife would later observe that he was forever altered after that morning. He shunned discussing the encounter in public, opting instead to confide only in trusted friends, local journalists, and eventually researchers who sought to unravel the enigma of his experience. Moss noted a peculiar form of communication during the episode of paralysis, sensing as though the beings had instilled thoughts into his consciousness, not words but a serene reassurance of their intent, firmly believing they had no desire to inflict harm. Yet, the haunting memory of being rendered immobile against his will lingered and caused him considerable distress. Unlike many abduction narratives that remained strictly personal tales, the Valensole encounter prompted an official investigation nearly instantaneously. Local authorities, referred to as Jean Arms, were dispatched to the lavender field where Massa claimed the craft had made contact. Their examination uncovered unequivocal physical evidence, a distinct impression in the earth where the object had settled. The plants exhibited a circular pattern of crushing, and the soil appeared to have undergone a frightening change, as if subjected to intense force. Samples were collected, and the French Air Force conducted a brief inquiry. However, the case was ultimately classified as unexplained. Massa himself underwent multiple interviews by law enforcement and military representatives, his account remaining unwavering throughout. His standing as a reputable veteran and farmer bolstered his case. Official documents acknowledged both the ground remnants and Massa's unusual decline in health, yet no medical rationale was provided. This event secured its place in the annals of French UFO documentation, regarded as one of the most thoroughly recorded incidents in European history. Massa lived on for many subsequent years, though the repercussions of his encounter continued to shadow him. A pervasive fatigue clung to him, his skin retained an unsettling sensitivity, and he frequently complained of sharp discomfort in his limbs. Psychologically, he withdrew further into himself, eschewing public appearances and interviews. Nevertheless, when he chose to share his story, his conviction remained resolute. Until his passing in 2004, he insisted he had witnessed entities from another realm amidst his lavender fields, that they had immobilized him with an apparatus, and that the aftermath had irrevocably influenced the course of his life. Neighbors, acquaintances, and local officials corroborated his integrity. Massa was not a man in pursuit of fame. Rather, he found himself resentful of the attention. His narrative endured largely due to the tangible evidence left in the field, the consistency of his recounting, and the visible toll his ordeal had taken on his health. The Valensole UFO incident stands out as one of the most significant abduction occurrences in European lore. In stark contrast to numerous reports that exist solely as anecdotes, Massa's experience bore real consequences. A landing trace amidst the lavender field, a man physically diminished for the remainder of his days, coupled with an official inquiry that validated something extraordinary had transpired. His body bore the hidden remnants of the paralysis beam, energy sapped, skin hypersensitive, and personality irrevocably altered. His mind was plagued by dreams and visions that refused to dissipate. To the French authorities, the case was filed under unexplained. For UFO enthusiasts, it became a seminal example of a close encounter of the third kind, complete with long-lasting health repercussions. For Maurice Massa, however, it transformed into a hidden burden. He had not sought out the extraordinary, which had approached him quietly within his lavender fields, leaving behind scars, both visible and emotional, that would never heal. What commenced as another day's labor evolved into an enduring chapter of history, not merely recounting a craft in a French field, but narrating the life of a man irrevocably marked by an encounter. The Peter Corey abduction, which took place in 1992 in Sydney, Australia, offers another compelling narrative. On July 23, 1992, a man named Peter Corey endured one of the most disconcerting and well-documented abduction experiences of contemporary times. Unlike countless cases reliant on mere recollection or hypnosis, Corey's ordeal produced both visible marks and a physical sample amenable to analysis. It was during the late morning when Corey returned to his home. A migrant from Lebanon, then in his late 20s, he was navigating the typical suburban landscape of his life. In the preceding years, he had already faced peculiar episodes, flashes of lost time, bizarre dreams, and an instance of paralysis where he awoke, immobilized and aware, as figures loomed beside his bed. However, this day unfolded differently. He reclined on his bed to rest when an abrupt, piercing pain shot through his head, akin to an invasive force penetrating his skull. Within moments, he found himself unable to move, a prisoner within his own body. Despite remaining conscious, his mind raced with panic while his body remained paralyzed. Then, two women materialized in his bedroom. They possessed a strikingly human appearance, yet their beauty seemed almost unnaturally flawless. One boasted long golden hair, fair skin, and striking blue eyes, while the other exhibited darker hair and appeared more Asian. Both appeared taller than average, willowy, and adorned in snug one-piece outfits that shimmered delicately. Corey recounted the moment as surreal. Despite their human-like figures, an unsettling aura enveloped them, and they seemed to convey communication beyond words, compelling his submission. One of the women drew him into an encounter of a physical nature, enforcing his involvement despite the paralysis. He described an overwhelming amalgamation of desire and dread, sensations that entwined and left him utterly powerless. Without warning, the intense experience concluded. The women vanished just as abruptly as they had appeared, and his paralysis dissipated. In the moments that followed, Corey realized something was dreadfully amiss. The throbbing pain in his head persisted, but more alarmingly, he felt a strange soreness in his groin. Rushing to the bathroom, he discovered two faint, almost imperceptible puncture wounds on his body. As he examined them, he noted the red, inflamed marks, painful to the touch, as if he had undergone some form of injection. But the strangeness did not end there. On his inner thigh, he found a long strand of blonde hair ensnared in his skin. Taken aback, he carefully extracted it and preserved it within a sealed envelope. He understood instinctively that it was linked to the bizarre episode he had just endured. Over the subsequent days, he endured sharp pains radiating from the puncture sites. His physician remained baffled, unable to account for the marks that were healing at a sluggish pace, leaving faint traces behind. Alongside these physical symptoms, he grappled with dizziness, persistent headaches, and an unusual sensitivity enveloping his skin. For Curie, the evidence of his ordeal was irrefutable. The puncture wounds and the unexpected strand of blonde hair provided concrete proof that the extraordinary event had transpired. He set the hair aside with great care, feeling unsure of how to proceed but unwilling to part with it. The psychological effects of the ordeal weighed heavily upon him. Curie found himself enveloped in anxiety, haunted by flashbacks of the women's faces and the paralyzing fear they instilled. Sleep evaded him, replaced by tumultuous nightmares. He existed in a state of perpetual alertness, scrutinizing his surroundings for any sign of their ominous return. In contrast to many who had endured abduction experiences, Curie resolved to seek clarity. He confided in his wife, who accepted his narrative without question, and together they reached out to the UFO Investigation Center of New South Wales, UFOIC. This choice distinguished his case from the multitude of others, as it opened the path to one of the most remarkable pieces of physical evidence in the annals of abduction accounts. During the mid-1990s, Curie entrusted the blonde hair sample to Bill Chalker, a well-regarded researcher in Australia. Chalker coordinated its examination with scientists proficient in forensic DNA analysis. The findings were astonishing. The sample was human, yet it exhibited peculiar anomalies. The mitochondrial DNA traced back to a rare Chinese Mongoloid genetic demographic, while the nuclear DNA unveiled European characteristics. This unusual combination yielded very few matches in contemporary genetic databases. Even more baffling were the microscopic irregularities found in the hair's shaft, which appeared unnaturally smooth and markedly resistant to chemical breakdown, diverging from the norms of conventional human hair. For researchers, this represented the closest encounter with physical biological evidence of alien abduction ever documented. The alien hair sample garnered significant attention in the realm of UFO research, linking Curie's bizarre encounter with empirical laboratory data. However, Curie's health challenges did not conclude with the incident in 1992. Over the years, he continued to suffer episodes of paralysis, emergence of puncture-like scars on his body, and recurring illnesses that confounded medical professionals. His mental well-being deteriorated as anxiety became a constant companion. He grew increasingly reticent about discussing his experiences publicly, fearing skepticism and ridicule. Yet, the burden of his experiences ultimately spurred him to open up. His account remained steadfast and consistent across decades, bolstering his credibility. Unlike numerous other abductees, Curie possessed physical evidence, scars, puncture marks, and the DNA-tested hair. Despite this evidence, peace of mind eluded him. If anything, it augmented his sense of vulnerability, affirming that his ordeal was no mere figment of imagination, but a verifiable occurrence. Though no official investigation was undertaken by the Australian government into his case, Chalker later indicated that individuals associated with intelligence agencies expressed a keen interest in the DNA outcomes. Though the results were disseminated with caution, they attracted quiet attention beyond the confines of the UFO research community. The implications were deeply disconcerting. Here was a scenario in which an abductee produced biological material, subjected to scientific scrutiny, and authenticated as anomalous, yet framed by a lack of official inquiry. Instead, the data exchanged hands discreetly, a scientific curiosity relegated to uncertainty. For Curie, this deafening silence was disquieting. He recognized that his scars and the DNA findings pointed to something extraordinary, yet no governing body appeared willing to confront or discuss it sincerely. By the late 1990s, Curie had reconciled that his life was intertwined with forces that lay beyond his influence. The faint scars from the puncture marks crisscrossed his body, each one a poignant reminder of incomprehensible nights. He meticulously compiled journals detailing each atypical mark, dream, or episode of paralysis. His testimony became pivotal in the assertion that abductions leave behind tangible physical traces. While detractors brushed aside the narratives as rooted in psychological phenomena, Curie's body narrated an alternative tale. Puncture marks, lingering discomfort, and that peculiar strand of hair defying simple categorization served as testament to an unfathomable experience. The Peter Curie abduction occupies a unique position in the chronicles of UFO phenomena. Unlike the myriad cases built solely upon recollections, his included physical scars and a biological artifact that underwent rigorous testing in laboratory conditions. The results intimated a genetic puzzle, a hair that, while human, displayed elements that were curiously hybrid, a challenge to categorize within known populations. For Curie, the encounter inflicted scars that transcended mere physicality. His body bore the evidence of punctures and anguish, while his nights were beset by visions of entities capable of manifesting at will. The hair sample underscored that something extraordinary had indeed transpired, yet it provided no solace whatsoever. Instead, it stood as a permanent reminder, affirming that his experiences were not conjured in the mind's eye. They were etched into his very being and intertwined with a strand of DNA that seemed to whisper of a reality beyond human comprehension. Within the confines of a gentle suburban home in Sydney, far removed from the fields of Brazil or the rivers of Mississippi, one man bore the weight of an abduction that left behind undeniable evidence that commanded attention. The scars on his body, the nightmares that plagued his waking hours, and the extraordinary strand of hair remain as among the most compelling testaments that encounters with the unknown can leave traces far more substantial than mere narratives. They had no inkling that within mere hours they would bear witness to a sequence of events that would leave them both physically and psychologically marked, with scars that would be both apparent and hidden from view. The counselors were the first to catch sight of a luminescent object sweeping across the night sky. Initially, it bore resemblance to a star, yet it moved with an agility that no known aircraft could emulate, darting back and forth in a manner that defied conventional flight paths. As their eyes remained fixated, the light began its descent towards the lake, soon accompanied by two smaller orbs of light. Hovering just above the water's surface, these objects emanated a gentle orange glow, captivating the men entirely. Their subsequent descriptions of the light suggested an astonishing degree of coordination, as if the entities were maneuvering in a calculated formation. Suddenly, one of the larger lights detached and approached the shoreline. In the blink of an eye, it projected a beam of illumination that enveloped the area where the counselor was seated. In an instant, Michael Lapp experienced a sudden rigidity in his body, leaving him completely immobilized, despite his full consciousness. His companion attempted to articulate a response, but only managed to stutter wordlessly. Both counselors soon felt as though a force was pulling them upward, as if they had been liberated from the constraints of gravity. Following this, their memories became fragmented. They managed to recall a curious interior, aglow with light, surrounded by diminutive humanoid figures characterized by disproportionately large heads and expansive dark eyes. These beings scrutinized them with an unsettling clinical detachment, using instruments against their limbs. Michael distinctly remembered a sharp prick in his forearm, a sensation as if a sample was being extracted. This encounter was marked by a telepathic communication from the beings, which provided no solace. Instead, it conveyed a cold sense of being observed. Hours later, the duo found themselves back at the lake's edge, the strange craft having vanished without a trace. Their watches betrayed nearly 2 hours of unaccounted time. In the aftermath of their return, both counselors grappled with unsettling symptoms. Michael noted a small circular scar on his right forearm, precisely where he had first sensed the jabbing pain during the ordeal. Intriguingly, this scar manifested as a shallow indentation, unlike any typical cut or bruise, resembling more accurately a small section of his skin having been excised. His peer reported a similar marking near his elbow, while both experienced an unusual level of fatigue. Their arms ached persistently, accompanied by transient vision problems. Episodes of light flaring disrupted their focus, lingering over several weeks. The most disquieting of all their physical consequences was the recurring tenderness surrounding the scars. Even years afterward, faint reminders remained visible, etched into their flesh. Investigations years later by experts revealed the unusual uniformity of these depressions, marking them as distinct from ordinary injuries. The psychological scars, however, ran even deeper for the two men. Michael Lapp found himself tormented by nightmares of levitating over the lake, surrounded by piercing beams of light. He suffered from severe panic attacks whenever he ventured back to the lake's edge. His companion also reported distressing flashbacks and increasing anxiety when confronted with bright lights in the dark. Both men faced struggles with insomnia and emotional seclusion, shying away from discussions about their encounter at camp, fearing disbelief and ridicule. Nevertheless, the vivid memories persisted, fragmented but impossibly clear. Years later, initiated by UFO researchers Walter Webb and Raymond Fowler through hypnosis, both recounted consistent accounts of their time aboard the craft, detailing the examination by the beings and the instruments pressed against their arms. These sessions left an indelible mark on them, reinforcing the trauma that had never truly faded. The mental ramifications included a deep-seated distrust of authority figures and an apprehension towards public discourse. Both men characterized themselves as irrevocably changed by the incident, becoming less carefree, more contemplative, and haunted by a vague sense of dread that they struggled to articulate. The Buff Ledge case underwent thorough investigation by Walter Webb from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Webb gathered testimonies from various camp staff and nearby residents who had observed peculiar lights that night. While not every witness reported an abduction, substantial corroboration suggested a sizable UFO presence over the campground. The photographs of the men's scars were subsequently included in Webb's report. The alignment of their narratives under hypnosis, paired with the physical evidence, established this case as one of the most thoroughly documented abductions of the late 1960s. Although there remains no record of Project Blue Book directly investigating the Buff Ledge incident, reports circulated within NIKAP, leading to the belief that U.S. Air Force intelligence scrutinized Webb's findings. This case entered UFO literature as one of the earliest multi-witness abduction accounts where physical evidence marked the abductees. The scars on their arms, while fading over time, never entirely vanished. For Michael, the minor scoop mark remained an enduring reminder of that fateful night at Buff Ledge. For his companion, the mark evolved into a source of anxiety, an incessant reminder that his body had been subject to actions beyond his consent. Both men endured the ramifications of their trauma silently. They shunned public notice, yet communicated with researchers in their later years, adamant that their experience at Buff Ledge was genuine and that the scars served as proof of operations rendered aboard the craft. Their tale would become pivotal in Fowler's case documentation for UFO investigations, as well as Webb's APRO reports. Marked as one of the exceptional abduction narratives supported by both physical scars and a multitude of witnesses, the Buff Ledge camp encounter remains one of the clearest examples of alien abduction. What began as an ordinary evening by Lake Champlain transformed into an enduring struggle for two young counselors. The circular scars on their arms, along with chronic fatigue, interrupted vision, and distressing nightmares, were far from transient. Instead, they stood as perpetual reminders of a night when they were taken and marked by entities whose motivations elude understanding. The case remains a tantalizing topic for investigators, upheld by its physical evidence, multiple eyewitnesses, and the consistent narratives provided. For the abductees, it unfolded as a narrative of enduring scars that never truly mended. an account layered with a depth that mere words could scarcely encapsulate. Beneath the shimmering stars of a Vermont summer night on the banks of Lake Champlain, two young men found themselves entwined in the grips of the unknown, ensnared by marks that hinted at a reality transcending human understanding. The tale turns now to the curious incident known as the Cisco Grove robot abduction, which occurred in the year 1964 in California, USA. On the evening of September 4th, 1964, a 38-year-old hunter named Donald Shrum embarked on a bow hunting expedition in the Sierra Nevada mountains alongside two companions. Their day had been spent tracking game through the wild terrain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, an unfortunate separation took place among the three friends. While his companions returned to their campsite, Shrum discovered himself alone, a considerable distance from shelter. With night rapidly enveloping the landscape, he resolved to scale a towering pine tree in order to secure himself above ground, a common practice among hunters when lost, as predators and the chill of the open air presented significant threats. However, as the darkness deepened, Shrum began to perceive a far more bizarre occurrence than any lurking animal. Perched in his treetop vantage, he spotted an eerie, luminous object gliding through the treetops. Initially, he mistook it for an aircraft, but as it drew nearer, its anomalous behavior left him astounded. The object descended gracefully, coming to hover in close proximity to where he sat. Silence enveloped the scene, with no sound of rotor blades or engines disturbing the night air. Only a faint hum resonated in the stillness. Unease coiled within him. Then, with a startling turn, the object dispatched three smaller figures that appeared to swoosh towards his high perch. Two of these entities bore a humanoid shape, adorned in metallic suits that reflected the dim starlight. They moved with an unsettling grace, resembling automatons. The third figure was distinctly robotic, with rigid limbs and a dome-shaped head, exhibiting jerky movements that heightened the surreal quality of the scene. Clinging desperately to the branches, with his bow and arrows at the ready, Shrum felt his heart racing as the beings gathered below, regarding him with an unsettling silence. The ensuing hours spiraled into a waking nightmare. While the beings attempted to entice him down, their tactics soon escalated. One of the humanoids directed a device skyward, unleashing a beam of light that struck Shrum, inducing instant convulsions within his body. The sensation was akin to being blasted with electricity. Despite this jolt, he maintained his grip on the branches. The entities persistently launched similar assaults, each beam leaving him increasingly weakened, his muscles trembling uncontrollably. At one point, darkness claimed him for a brief spell before he regained consciousness, still perched aloft. Shrum unleashed arrows at the figures below, convinced he had hit at least one, only to find the shaft rebounding harmlessly, as if their suits possessed an impenetrable quality. Undeterred, the figures continued their efforts to displace him. The robotic creature ascended partially up the trunk, its mechanical hands gripping the bark with chilling determination. Shrum managed to kick it down, but the exertion drained him further. He recalled the creature releasing a noxious cloud, a mist that ascended towards him, causing him to cough uncontrollably. The siege persisted through the entire night. Shrum suffered relentless assaults from the paralysis beams and gas emissions, each wave of attack leaving him increasingly ill and drained. As dawn broke, the craft and its mysterious occupants vanished into the morning light. Reluctantly, Shrum descended from the tree, disoriented and barely able to stand. The marks of his ordeal remained imprinted on his body. On his chest and arms were patchy burns reminiscent of first-degree injuries, sore, raw, and stinging to the touch. His limbs bore the bruises that told of his convulsions and fierce clutching of the tree. In the days that followed, Shrum discovered tiny circular indentations on his forearms and ribs. These blemishes healed into faint yet permanent scars, which he displayed to family members and later investigators. Furthermore, he endured dizziness, nausea, and profound fatigue that lingered for weeks post-encounter. His weight plummeted, and he was beset by recurrent headaches. Medical assessments confirmed his injuries but offered no reasonable explanation. The burn-like markings failed to correspond with any typical environmental damage, while the scoop scars appeared to be the result of deliberate action rather than mere happenstance. The psychological aftermath was equally harrowing. Shrum, who had once relished the wilderness, found himself grappling with profound anxiety at the very thought of being alone after sundown. Nightmares plagued him, filled with visions of searing beams of light, of mechanical figures scaling trees, of suffocating an unseen gas amidst the dark. The trauma clung to him throughout the years. As the pangs of panic and episodes of depression surfaced, he confided only in his closest family at the beginning. For decades, he shied away from public discourse on his experience, fearing the ridicule that could ensue. It was not until later in his life that he began to share the complete narrative, especially after others recounted similar encounters involving paralysis beams and distinctive scoop marks. Initially, he refrained from reporting his experience to authorities, yet word eventually reached UFO investigators. His account made its way into the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena files and was later cited by authors chronicling abduction experiences. Researchers recognized the similarities between his scars and those of other victims from the 1960s and 70s. The methodical nature of the scoop marks and the burn-like injuries suggested they stemmed from intentional attempts rather than random causes. While Project Blue Book had begun to wind down by 1964, UFO reports from that era occasionally referenced peculiar encounters on the ground within California, and it is likely that the Cisco Grove case traversed through unofficial Air Force channels. Shrum carried the weight of that fateful night in the Sierra Nevada with him for the rest of his life. The scars on his arms and ribs, though faint, remained a permanent part of his story. More deeply, the imprint of trauma profoundly affected his mental well-being. No longer did he engage in wilderness excursions, which had once provided him with joy and tranquility. He frequently conveyed to his family that the experience had irrevocably altered his existence. When he finally chose to share his narrative years later, reactions varied. Some met his account with skepticism, while others found themselves captivated by the intrigue it inspired among researchers. His genuineness, along with the physical remnants of that harrowing encounter and his unwavering recounting of events, elevated the case to one of the most extraordinary instances in the annals of abduction history. The Cisco Grove incident involving the robot represents a rare and harrowing episode featuring a male abductee, marked both physically and psychologically by a direct confrontation. Unlike transient glimpses of lights in the night sky, Shrum endured a relentless ordeal lasting through the night, one that left him with burns, scoop marks, and lifelong psychological scars. The struggle within the tree was not merely a test of survival. It constituted a trial of resilience against entities that seemed singularly focused on subduing him. His scars served as mute witnesses to a night where the wilderness of the Sierra Nevada transformed into a battleground between humanity and the unfathomable. For researchers of UFO phenomena, this case is notable for both its tangible evidence and its alignment with subsequent abduction narratives. For Shrum, his tale was etched into both his skin and his consciousness, marks that chronicled a night in which he valiantly fought against forces beyond his comprehension and emerged on the other side. The Kofu City Vineyard incident, occurring in 1975 in Japan, further expands upon the realm of extraordinary encounters. On the evening of February 23, 1975, in the serene city of Kofu in Yamanashi Prefecture, two young elementary school boys embarked on what they expected to be yet another unremarkable adventure. Their neighborhood, fringed with farmland and vineyards, provided ample opportunities for children to play as dusk settled in, chasing each other through the rows of vines and winding dirt paths. The night air was cool, the distant city lights flickered softly, and the tranquility of the countryside was infused only with their joyous laughter. No forewarning indicated that this particular evening would unfold differently until they detected a luminous orange light descending from the heavens. Initially, the light appeared as a remote glimmer, pulsing gently against the encroaching darkness of the clouds. For a brief moment, they speculated that it might be a star emerging, or perhaps an aircraft approaching a nearby airstrip. However, as their gazes remained fixed, the brilliance intensified, expanding and moving in purposeful trajectories. Their fascination transformed into compelling curiosity. The light danced across the horizon, then suddenly plummeted at a steep angle, halting above a vineyard situated just a short distance away, hovering there, resplendent with a steady orange glow. Overcoming any initial trepidation, they gradually ventured toward the vineyard. Their excitement peaked. As they drew nearer, the object revealed itself in clearer detail. It was neither a star nor an airplane. Nestled among the rows of vines rested a domed craft, emanating light from its underbelly. The boys later depicted it as approximately 7 feet tall and 15 feet in diameter, its metallic exterior glinting under the ambient illumination with a hatch evident on one side. An unusual humming reverberated around them, distinct from any machine they had ever encountered. The radiant glow enveloped the vines, and casting an otherworldly orange hue, while the air carried a faint scent reminiscent of something metallic, akin to heated iron. They halted just shy of the vineyard's border when the hatch creaked open, and from it emerged a being unlike anything they had ever seen before. Short in stature, no more than 4 feet tall, this entity was enveloped in a reflective suit that shimmered in the craft's light. Its skin, where visible, presented as dark and wrinkled, with a disproportionately large head. The features of its face etched themselves into their memories, deeply etched lines, large pointed ears, and a mouth that revealed 3 fang-like teeth when it opened. Its dark eyes, seemingly alive with glimmers of curiosity, mirrored their own movements with an unsettling accuracy. The being advanced with a hesitant gait, as though unfamiliar with the terrain. Drawing closer to the boys, who remained transfixed in simultaneous awe and fear, it extended a hand. One boy, caught off guard, felt the creature's cold hand touch his upper arm. In an instant, a fierce burning sensation surged from his shoulder down to his elbow. The boy screamed and recoiled, gripping the spot where the being had made contact. His friend, filled with alarm, seized his hand, pulling him backward. They stumbled out of the vines just as the being turned and began retreating toward the craft. They caught a glimpse of other diminutive figures moving within the glowing dome, although none ventured outside. In mere moments, the hatch sealed shut, and the craft descended silently into the night sky, disappearing into the enveloping darkness. Terror-stricken, the boys raced homeward. The one who had been touched continued to wail, insisting his arm was on fire. Concerned, his mother examined him, revealing a red blister-like mark on his upper arm and shoulder. It resembled a superficial burn, yet there had been no exposure to fire, scalding water, or any electrical source that could explain its appearance. The skin beneath her touch felt hot, and it caused him considerable discomfort. In mere hours, the burn presented itself as a welt that hindered his ability to move his arm comfortably. That same night, reports emerged from other local residents who claimed to have witnessed strange lights illuminating the night sky. Several adults recounted similar sights, describing glowing orange objects weaving erratically above the fields. Their testimonies, later compiled by journalists and investigators, lent credence to at least segments of the children's account. Alarmed by the mark on her son's arm, the mother reached out to local authorities. The police arrived at the vineyard the following morning. They discovered atypical impressions imprinted in the soil, circular depressions where the ground appeared compressed, indicating the presence of a heavy object. Additionally, they noted that the vines in that area lay bent and damaged, though no signs of machinery or vehicles had trespassed into the field. In the ensuing days, the afflicted boy continued to grapple with lingering symptoms. The burn mark lingered prominently for more than a week, before gradually diminishing into a delicate scar. He expressed discomfort, detailing stinging sensations whenever the affected area was touched, and on occasion, experiences of numbness radiating down his arm. His family sought medical attention, and the attending physician acknowledged that the skin was inflamed but was unable to ascertain a cause aligning with conventional burn injuries. There was no evidence of chemical irritation, nor had the boy encountered any electrical exposure. The physician observed that the injury bore similarities to a thermal burn, yet its healing trajectory was notably atypical. Simultaneously, the second boy, though physically unharmed, was consumed by intense psychological distress. The traumatic sight of his friend's injury and the frightening visage of the entity he had encountered stayed etched in his mind. In a matter of days, he began to awaken during the night, shrieking that the creature had returned. His parents noticed a newfound reluctance in him to pass by the vineyard, along with an inexplicable aversion to the darkness. The boy who had been marked by the entity also fell prey to nightmares, experiencing recurring visions of the bulging face, pointed ears, and 3 sharp fangs. In these dreams, the being would stretch out toward him, and with each encounter, he would awaken clutching his arm, convinced he could still sense the burn. This incident piqued the interest of various Japanese UFO researchers who meticulously documented the boy's testimony. Both boys offered uniform descriptions of the craft, the entity's features, and the events that unfolded. The honesty of their accounts resonated with investigators, bolstered further by additional witnesses who reported observing glowing lights in the sky. The remarkable physical evidence of the scar distinctly set this case apart from others. While numerous UFO sightings in Japan merely involved lights or ambiguous shapes, few resulted in a documented injury verified by both family members and a medical professional. The boys' young ages cast aside the notion of intricate fabrications, and their stories remained steadfast under multiple lines of questioning. In the ensuing years, the incident in Kofu became a seminal case in the realm of Japanese UFO literature. The scar on the young boy's arm transformed into a symbol representing the tangible reality of such encounters. Even as it faded, he frequently pointed to the location, recalling the searing pain and the foreign touch that had left its mark. Growing older, he occasionally relayed experiences of pain and heightened sensitivity in that arm, although physicians were never able to provide satisfactory explanations. Conversely, his friend shouldered the psychological repercussions for a longer duration, battling night terrors well into his teenage years. The police report on the incident, though measured in its language, acknowledged the discovery of unusual impressions found in the vineyard. Local newspapers ran stories on the event, framing it as a captivating enigma. While government authorities did not pursue the case beyond initial inquiries, UFO enthusiasts, both in Japan and internationally, cataloged it as one of the most compelling instances of a close encounter of the third kind in Asia, characterized by physical repercussions for the witnesses. What makes the incident at Kofu City Vineyard so enthralling is the amalgamation of factors involved: children as eyewitnesses, corroborating adults who observed lights, tangible traces left in the soil, and, crucially, the scar on a young boy's arm that remained inexplicable. This case compelled even the most steadfast skeptics to pause, as tangible evidence existed that could not merely be dismissed as a product of imagination. The lives of the boys were indelibly transformed in understated yet significant ways. One bore the visible mark of his encounter, the other carried a weight of trepidation in his psyche. Together, they provided a testimony that is echoed through decades. Ultimately, the scar may have healed into an unobtrusive remnant, but the memories persisted unyieldingly. They matured into men who seldom shared their experiences publicly, yet their ordeal remained enshrined in UFO archives and Japanese reports. On that February evening in 1975, in a serene vineyard on the outskirts of Kofu, 2 children brushed against the periphery of the incomprehensible. One emerged with proof upon his skin, a scar that whispered tales of a touch from the unknown. They writhed on the ground, immobilized as if an unseen force had tethered their every nerve. When fellow personnel arrived moments later, the sight that met them was harrowing. 2 soldiers incapacitated, their bodies marred by severe burns. The skin on their chests, arms, and faces was blistered and peeling, leaving the rescuers stunned by the extent of their injuries. One soldier, still barely conscious, attempted to recount what had transpired, weakly gesturing toward the horizon where the object had vanished. The second soldier lapsed in and out of awareness, his body racked with shock. Both were swiftly transported to the military infirmary within the fort before being transferred to a hospital under stringent security measures. Medical professionals tasked with their examination were taken aback by the distinctive nature of their burns. The wounds resembled those caused by radiation exposure rather than by fire. The skin was marked with precisely defined patches, some areas suffering from deep blisters while others remained untouched, suggesting a beam had selectively scorched parts of their bodies. One soldier was left disfigured with third-degree burns that would permanently alter his facial features and arms. The other soldier endured severe burns across his torso and back. Medical personnel observed that the injuries aligned with the effects of a high-intensity directed energy source, starkly contrasting with burns from fire or boiling water. Both men exhibited secondary symptoms as well, including dizziness, nausea, agonizing headaches, and intermittent loss of vision. In response, the Brazilian Army launched an immediate investigation into the incident. Officers conducted interviews with the injured men as soon as their conditions stabilized enough for them to speak. Their accounts were straightforward and consistent. A brilliant object had hovered ominously above them, and without warning, a beam of light had struck them. The soldiers had no opportunity for defense or escape, their narratives aligning perfectly with one another, further supported by the evidence of their injuries. This was indisputably no trick. These were disciplined servicemen, and their bodies bore testament to a chilling truth. The military classified the incident, imposing restrictions on access to medical reports and hospital records. Nevertheless, rumors began to circulate among the ranks and beyond the fort. Within mere days, local newspapers reported that 2 soldiers had been hospitalized following a mysterious aerial encounter. Journalists engaged in rampant speculation, yet the specifics regarding the burns and the description of the glowing craft remained resolutely consistent across various sources. For the injured soldiers, the ordeal did not conclude with their hospital stay. As the burns began to heal, they resigned themselves to thick scars left on their chests, arms, and faces. This disfigurement served as a permanent reminder of the night they had come under attack from an unidentified aerial force. One soldier struggled with psychological breakdowns, unable to reconcile both the trauma of the experience and the ridicule that ensued. The other attempted to resume his duties, but found himself grappling with chronic pain and fatigue, as if his nervous system had sustained damage from the encounter. Together, they carried the weight of living proof that something beyond human comprehension had inflicted direct harm upon them. Mentally, the scars were equally profound. Survivors of conventional combat often contend with post-traumatic stress, and these men were no exception, though their torment stemmed not from a human adversary, but from something unfathomable. Nightmares haunted them, vivid visions of blinding light and debilitating pain. One soldier recalled feeling an intense heat even in the depths of his slumber, awakening in a cold sweat, convinced he had been struck once more. Both developed an increasing anxiety regarding nighttime duties and a pronounced aversion to expansive open spaces. The Fort Taipu incident emerged as one of the initial widely publicized Brazilian UFO encounters, resulting in severe human injury. Investigators would later connect it to a larger pattern of UFO activity throughout Brazil in the late 1950s and 60s, which included additional reports of beams of light inflicting burns or paralysis on witnesses. Yet the military maintained a resolute silence. Official statements minimized the incident, portraying it as an enigmatic but isolated event. However, within the UFO research community, it was perceived as compelling evidence of either hostile or at the very least dangerous contact. Decades later, declassified documents from the Brazilian military verified that the Army had indeed taken the case seriously. Reports highlighted the unusual characteristics of the burns and the absence of any known earthly origin. Medical professionals concluded that the injuries aligned with exposure to a type of directed radiation, although the source eluded identification. Surviving records portrayed the soldiers as trustworthy witnesses, devoid of any prior history of misconduct or fabrication. What rendered the Atapu incident particularly unsettling was its occurrence at a military facility, involving trained personnel actively engaged in duty. This was not a rural dweller mistaking a weather balloon for something otherworldly, nor a child spinning tales of fantasy. These were dedicated soldiers stationed at a coastal defense fort, enduring burns and scars in full view of their comrades. Their injuries were irrefutable, their testimonies unwavering, and the object they described defied all explanation. For the two of them, the scars symbolized more than mere evidence. They constituted a profound, lifelong burden. One soldier, purportedly retired prematurely from military service, unable to cope with the toll it had taken. The other continued to navigate life with disfigurements that marked him wherever he traveled, an unending reminder of the night when he was besieged by a beam from above. Their families bore this burden too, witnessing their loved ones contend with pain, trauma, and the social stigma that followed. The Fort Taipu case eventually gained recognition as one of the most critical cases of UFO-related injuries worldwide. Unlike ambiguous sightings or fleeting encounters, this incident resulted in tangible, measurable harm. It left scars that could be photographed, injuries that could be clinically assessed, and testimonies that could not be brushed aside as figments of imagination. For the Brazilian military, it proved an embarrassment beyond description, a puzzle they struggled to solve. Conversely, for UFO researchers, the incident served as a compelling verification of the phenomenon's existence and its potential peril. In hindsight, the Atipu case foreshadowed subsequent events in Brazil, notably the Calar UFO flap of 1977, during which civilians were struck by beams of light that left behind burns and puncture wounds. In both situations, the accounts detailing directed energy, the types of injuries suffered, and the psychological impacts were remarkably consistent. It could be argued that Atipu represented the initial alert that encounters with these objects bore risks that had the potential to scar both the skin and the psyche. Today, the Fort Atipu incident endures as a case that evades dismissal. The physical marks once borne by those two soldiers have faded into history with their passing. Yet their harrowing experience is meticulously documented within Brazilian military records and remains vivid in the recollections of those who witnessed them contort in agony that fateful night. They were the sentinels of a fort, men well trained to protect against tangible foes, and yet they were rendered powerless against a force that appeared to descend from the very heavens above. In their eyes, there was no battle to be fought, merely a ray of light that seared into their flesh, branding them as unwilling participants in one of the most haunting encounters in UFO lore. Fast forward to the encounter at Loya Air Base in 1976, Peru. On the 11th of April, 1980, in the arid skies surrounding La Jolla Air Base in southern Peru, a young fighter pilot by the name of Lieutenant Oscar Santa Maria Huertas was gearing up for a mission he presumed would be rather routine. At that time, Santa Maria was merely 23 years old, yet already an adept pilot, entrusted with a Soviet-built Sukhoi Su-22, which stood among the most sophisticated aircraft in the Peruvian Air Force arsenal. Little did he foresee that this mission would leave him grappling not only with unanswerable questions, but also with enduring physical consequences that haunted him for years to come. The morning sky was a clear blue canvas when radar operators at La Jolla detected an unidentified object hovering above the desert's training grounds. Initially, they suspected it was either a wayward balloon or espionage craft invading Peruvian airspace. Given the fraught geopolitical landscape and the sensitive nature of the base, equipped with advanced weaponry and frequently under surveillance from foreign intelligence, immediate orders were issued. They scrambled an interceptor. Santa Maria climbed into his Sukhoi Su-22, the engines roaring to life as he ascended into the desert expanse. By approximately 7:15 in the morning, he was closing in on the anomalous object. From his cockpit, he discerned its pearlescent gleam in the sunlight. Initially mistaking it for a balloon, motionless against the azure sky, he armed his cannon and unleashed a barrage, 30 rounds of 30mm shells. The projectiles should have torn the balloon apart instantly, but they vanished upon contact with the surface of the object, as if absorbed, leaving no trace, no smoke, no explosion. The object remained steadfast, showing no signs of disruption. Santa Maria circled and approached once more, firing again, but once more the rounds proved ineffective. The object began to ascend, slowly climbing into the atmosphere. He followed, accelerating to keep pace. The pursuit extended over the desert and into the mountain ranges. For nearly half an hour, he executed repeated attack runs, expendable ammunition, and aggressive maneuvers. Yet the object always managed to stay just out of reach, its movements deliberate and unhurried. Then, without any prelude, the entity unleashed a dazzling burst of light. The cockpit of his aircraft was inundated with a white-blue radiance. Santa Maria later recounted that he felt an overwhelming wave of heat engulf him even through his flight suit. The straps of the harness across his shoulders grew decidedly warm, almost scorching against his skin. Tears welled in his eyes. A throbbing pain gripped his head. For a few seconds, he was engulfed by a sensation that he might succumb to unconsciousness. As the brilliant light receded, the object shot upward into the sky, disappearing from view. Disoriented and physically drained, Santa Maria disengaged from the chase and returned to base. His landing was secure, however, he was far from unscathed. In the debriefing room, he candidly informed senior officers of the events that had unfolded, describing how rounds had seemingly disappeared into the object, its extraordinary immunity to weaponry, the blinding illumination, and the intense heat he had experienced. As medical personnel examined him, they discovered reddened patches along his shoulders where the harness had pressed against his body, skin irritated and blistered in small spots, sore to the touch. Doctors noted that the injuries bore semblance to mild radiation burns or localized heat exposure, although the cockpit conditions should have precluded such effects. His eyes exhibited bloodshot characteristics, with pupils reactive but sluggish, and he reported frequent headaches and sensations of nausea in the hours following the mission. In the subsequent days, there was little immediate improvement in his condition. The burns on his shoulders evolved into faint yet permanent scars, small reminders marking the moment he was enveloped by light. Headaches continued to sporadically plague him, sometimes accompanied by dizziness and a persistent ringing in his ears. Though he eventually resumed flight duties, he lamented that his night vision had diminished, and encounters with bright flashes of light provoked discomfort and anxiety. Psychologically, the encounter left its own indelible impressions. Santa Maria, a regimented pilot trained for engagements with enemy aircraft and accustomed to pressure, found his composure shaken. He had confronted a force that rendered his weapons inefficient, an entity impervious to both his training and technology. More disturbingly, it had penetrated the confines of his cockpit, searing him and marking his body in a way that discipline could not obliterate. He began to grapple with a growing anxiety concerning future intercept missions, especially when unfamiliar radar returns appeared on his screen. In the weeks that ensued, he recounted sleepless nights spent mulling over the harrowing pursuit, endlessly questioning why the enigmatic object had spared his life. For the Peruvian Air Force, the incident was both a source of embarrassment and a troubling mystery. The occurrence was meticulously recorded in official documents, with medical evaluations promptly filed. Senior officers, while maintaining a veneer of professionalism, acknowledged in private discussions that their most sophisticated aircraft and weaponry had proven ineffective against this unidentified craft, and that their pilot had suffered physical injuries in the ordeal. The base itself was a strategic asset, housing various Soviet-made technologies and serving as one of Peru's critical air defense installations. The fact that such a mysterious object had loomed above, unchallenged and undamaged, warranted serious concern. Despite the military's efforts to keep the details under wraps, rumors circulated within defense communities. Years later, Oscar Santa Maria provided his testimony at the 2009 Citizens' Hearing on Disclosure in Washington, D.C., where he recounted the unsettling incident under oath. He vividly described the burns etched into his shoulders, the disorientation that enveloped him, and the utter futility of attempting to engage the craft with his weaponry. His testimony was consistent with the initial records preserved in Peru, creating a rare continuity between immediate accounts and later revelations. The encounter at La Joya stands out, merging elements of a typical dogfight with the undeniable characteristics of a close encounter. In contrast to distant lights or ephemeral photographs, This case highlighted a military pilot in an armed aircraft firing hundreds of rounds at close range, suffering tangible consequences to his own body. The scars he bore were modest, yet served as permanent reminders that his cockpit had been breached by a force far beyond his comprehension. For researchers investigating unidentified flying objects, the case ranks among the most compelling records from South America. It solidifies the reality of the phenomenon and its capacity to engage physically with both human beings and machinery. Although the burns on Santa Maria's shoulders did not pose a life-threatening risk, they stood as undeniable evidence of contact, illustrating that energy had invaded his cockpit, leaving behind confirmed tissue damage. The psychological ramifications, too, were profound, shaping his career and worldview long after the skies over La Jolla had returned to calm. Today, the incident at the La Jolla Air Base persists as a pivotal case in discussions surrounding military encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena, often cited alongside Brazil's Fort Taipu and Canada's Falcon Lake incident as part of a broader pattern. When humanity seeks to confront these inexplicable objects, the consequences can manifest in beams of light, bursts of energy, or radiation-like effects that leave marks upon the body and rattle the mind. For Oscar Santamaria, this encounter became a defining chapter, an experience for which no amount of rigorous training had adequately prepared him. In the serene desolation of the desert skies, in pursuit of a target that would not relent, he learned that the unknown could lash back, not with missiles or bullets, but with light itself, light that etched its presence into his very being. The Falcon Lake incident, occurring in 1967, Canada, unfolded on May 20, 1967, amid the untamed wilderness near Falcon Lake, Manitoba. There, a prospector by the name of Stefan Michelac set forth on what he presumed would be yet another routine expedition. Not merely an ordinary vagabond, Michelac arrived in Canada from Poland after the war, meticulously crafting a new existence as a mechanic, military veteran, and enthusiastic geologist. He was discerning, methodical, and disciplined, regarded among his acquaintances for his sober demeanor and skepticism. The Canadian shield terrain surrounding Falcon Lake had long been his preferred hunting ground, a place where he could labor at quartz outcrops in hopes of discovering silver veins. That clear morning, with azure skies above, he departed early, equipped only with his tools, a hammer, a compass, a notebook, and the unwavering tenacity of someone who found solace in diligent work. Hours slipped by as he ventured along the rocky ridges bordering the lake. The surrounding forest resonated with the melodies of birds and the gentle rustling of pine needles. Then, shortly before noon, an alien sound shattered the tranquility. At first, he mistook it for the honking of geese in flight. Shielding his eyes, he looked skyward, but the sound morphed into a mechanical whirring, and what descended from above was far from avian. Two glowing objects, shaped like cigars, appeared above the treetops, emitting a reddish glow and shimmering as they sliced through the air. One object remained suspended, like a lantern illuminating the wilderness, while the other descended rapidly, decelerating as it neared a flat rocky expanse merely 100 feet away. The sound had transformed into a high-pitched whir that was both metallic and grating. Michelac froze in disbelief, transfixed by the sight before him. The landed object, unlike anything he had ever encountered, boasted a disc shape and measured approximately 40 feet in diameter. It glimmered with a dull silver hue that mirrored the midday sun, its surface appearing seamless, with sharply defined geometric edges. From its underside, faint light cascaded down, casting long shadows across the stones. The aroma in the air shifted too, as a pungent scent of sulfur, mingled with traces of ozone and burnt wires, permeated his senses. Michelac coughed, the acrid tang irritating his throat. Yet, curiosity outweighed his trepidation. His past experience with machinery and aircraft led him to ponder whether this might be a new experimental vehicle. With caution, he approached, notebook in hand, diligently sketching the scene before him. As he inched nearer, a panel on the craft slid open, spilling forth brilliant light that illuminated the rocky landscape. Within, he believed he could discern voices, high-pitched, mechanical, and rhythmic, as if several beings were communicating in harmony. Michelac attempted to engage in communication. He called out, hoping to establish a connection by saying hello in English. The voices abruptly halted their rhythmic sound. Undeterred, he shifted languages, next trying German, then Polish, and finally Russian, longing for one of them to break the silence. But within the craft, all fell quiet, the melodic murmurs fading away. Moments later, the panel slid shut with a fluid motion, encasing the craft as effectively as the latch on a vault door. He found himself now just within arm's reach. Heat emanated fiercely from the craft's surface, potent enough that when he instinctively extended his work glove to stabilize himself, it met a disastrous fate, melting and fusing to his palm. He swore viciously, pulling back, hastily shaking off the ruined glove. A surge of panic consumed him as the reality sank in that the craft was not merely solid, but dangerously searing to the touch. In an unexpected movement, the entire object rotated slightly. As it turned, a grid-like vent on its side became visible. Before Michelac could retreat to safety, a powerful burst of gas or energy erupted from the vent with explosive force. The surge struck him directly in the chest, immediately enveloping him in waves of heat that felt unbearable. His shirt ignited, fabric crumbling under the merciless fire that danced across his torso. The acrid stench of burning cotton, mixed with the nauseating scent of scorched flesh, filled the air around him. He collapsed backward, instinctively rolling on the rugged ground to extinguish the flames, while desperately tearing away the remnants of his ignited shirt. The pain was beyond articulation. His lungs gasped for air, filled with noxious fumes that forced him into violent retching. His head spun wildly, vision darkening at the periphery. Summoning what little strength he had left, he managed to regain his footing, clutching his chest as he beheld the craft ascending silently into the clear sky. It rose with an almost ghostly grace to join the second object hovering overhead, and together they shot upward, disappearing into the endless expanse of blue. Left alone and wounded, Michelac felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He succumbed to the compulsion to vomit onto the rocks, the sulfur's acrid odor still pungent around him. His body shook uncontrollably, each wave of dizziness threatening to topple him once more. Yet, through sheer determination, he gathered his belongings and embarked on the arduous journey back towards the highway. The path was grueling. He collapsed repeatedly, grasping tree trunks for support as his legs grew weak beneath him. Each breath scorched his throat. By the time he careened onto the Trans-Canada Highway hours later, he was soaked in sweat, pallid, and teetering on the brink of consciousness. A compassionate motorist stopped, recognizing his distress, and transported him to a nearby hospital in Falcon Lake. The medical staff were shocked by his condition. His shirt lay in ruin, reduced to singed fragments, while his chest bore fresh burns where the blast had struck. The skin was raw, red, and blistered in a distinct geometric design that mirrored the craft's vent. His symptoms pointed toward radiation exposure, persistent vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, severe headaches, and alarming weight loss in the weeks that followed. He had shed nearly 50 pounds in a matter of days. The incident soon drew the scrutiny of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who conducted thorough interviews. Even as his health waned, Michelac recounted his experiences with an unsettling calm. Officers ventured to the site he described and uncovered physical evidence. A circular burn etched into the rock formation where the craft had landed, scorched vegetation surrounding it, alongside radiation levels markedly elevated beyond normal ranges. The pungency of sulfur lingered for days following the episode. Soil samples collected indicated the presence of radioactive isotopes, compelling Canada's Department of National Defence to engage, assigning officers to investigate both the landing site and Michelac himself. He underwent repeated interviews, his statements meticulously scrutinized for any discrepancies. Throughout, his narrative remained unwavering. The Americans, too, expressed interest. Project Blue Book, The United States Air Force's program dedicated to UFO inquiries assessed the evidence, designating the case as unexplained. As all this unfolded, Michelac's condition steadily declined. He endured continuous nausea, profound weakness, and recurrent headaches. His injuries were slow to heal. As time passed, the burns subsided, yet they left faint marks, permanent reminders that would trouble him for many years to come. Once a robust figure, he became gaunt, his vigor deceasing sharply. What had once been a source of solace, the vast wilderness, suddenly morphed into an unsettling reminder of the blinding light and searing heat he had encountered. Psychologically, the experience scarred him just as deeply as the physical wounds. Michelac had never embraced fanciful tales. Friends deemed him practical, diligent, often skeptical of exaggerated claims. Yet, reconciling what he had witnessed became a significant struggle. He replayed the moment in his mind tirelessly. The alien voices from within the craft, the intense wave of heat, and the unnerving silence that followed. Nightly awakenings drenched in sweat plagued him, an ever-present belief that the light might return to strike him again. His self-assurance crumbled. A man who once relished solitude in the forest now grew fearful of being alone. The authorities couldn't dismiss the incident. The RCMP reports, radiation samples, and medical validation collectively constituted indisputable proof of a remarkable event. The Canadian government never provided a conclusive explanation, opting instead to quietly shelve the information. Researchers would later observe that it represented one of the most thoroughly documented UFO cases in North America, replete with physical evidence and formal investigation at every level. Michelac shunned any quest for publicity or compensation from his plight. If anything, he carried a resentment toward the attention he received. Occasionally ridiculed by the media, he found himself falsely accused of fabricating the tale. Nevertheless, he remained steadfast in his account until the end of his life in 1999. He maintained that he had indeed encountered something otherworldly near Falcon Lake, something that had nearly claimed his life. Today, the Falcon Lake encounter is preserved as Canada's most notorious UFO incident, not recalled for luminous phenomena in the sky or distant images of unidentified shapes, but rather for the lingering aftermath, a man irrevocably altered, physically and psychologically. For researchers, it exists as one of the most compelling cases in UFO studies. For Stefan Michelac, it became an enduring wound, a haunting reminder of the day when the wilderness he adored transformed into a haunting stage for an encounter that left him searching for answers until his final days. The larger story is complete. But if you'd like to linger, you'll hear several short stories now, each rare, brief, and softly told. The Kelly-Hopkinsville Siege. On a muggy Kentucky night in the summer of 1955, the Sutton farmhouse stood isolated at the forest's edge. It was one of those nights when the air retains its warmth, when the incessant chorus of insects fills the atmosphere, and when the darkness outside the windows seems unusually oppressive. 11 souls filled that modest dwelling, a mix of family, friends, and children, gathered in camaraderie following supper, blissfully unaware that by the dawn's light, their tale would etch itself into the annals of one of the most bizarre and frightful legends in American lore. It all commenced shortly after twilight. Billy Ray Taylor, a visitor hailing from Pennsylvania, ventured outside to fetch water from the well. The sky was still deepening into night when something drew his attention. He stood motionless. Above the tree line, a luminous disk hovered silently, more radiant than any star, trailing behind a wisp of rainbow fire. It glided low and methodically, and then descended into the woods behind the house. Billy Ray's heart raced as he stumbled back inside. He blurted out that he had just witnessed something land outside. The others initially dismissed him with laughter. He was known for his tall tales. However, as the amusement faded, his trembling hands and pale complexion cast a spell of silence over the room. They attempted to dismiss it, but the stillness that enveloped the night grew heavier, pressing against the farmhouse's walls. Moments later, their family dog began barking wildly, straining at its chain near the back door. The barking escalated into a frantic yelp before abruptly ceasing, as if muffled. A sudden, suffocating silence draped over the farmhouse like a shroud. Lanterns flickered to life, casting elongated shadows against the walls. Every face turned toward the windows, straining to listen. At first, there was silence. Then, illuminated by the glow seeping from the back door, they laid eyes upon it. A figure, diminutive and no taller than 3 feet. Its head appeared disproportionately large, a round orb too vast for its slender frame. Its arms dangled nearly to the ground, ending with elongated, claw-like fingers. But it was the eyes that froze them in their tracks, huge, glowing yellow orbs luminescent as lanterns in the dark. The creature's body gleamed, as if coated in metal, capturing every glimmer of light. And it moved in a manner no human should, gliding and jerking, its feet barely brushing the earth. Someone whispered a prayer, and men grabbed their firearms, a shotgun, a rifle. As the creature crept closer, raising its hands whether in supplication or curiosity was unclear, no one waited to discover its intentions. The guns erupted, thundering into the night. The being flipped backward, collapsing into the grass, and then vanished into the shadows. Relief washed over the room for a fleeting moment, but then a scratching sound resonated above them. The family looked up, only to find another pair of glowing eyes gazing down through the roof's overhang, fixated on them through the window. Chaos ensued. A shot rang out, splintering the wood. That figure tumbled off the roof, only to rise again, unheard, drifting back into the enveloping darkness. Thus, the siege commenced. Figures emerged at the windows, their luminous eyes pressing against the glass. Long fingers clawed at the screens. Shadows danced just outside the lantern light. With each shot fired, the creatures floated back, seemingly unharmed, only to return once more moments later. Inside, dread ruled the atmosphere. The children cried while the adults muttered frantic prayers in between each gunshot. They endeavored to barricade the doors, dragging furniture against them, yet nothing deterred the intruders from encircling them. The beings demonstrated a chilling patience. They never rushed. They simply observed. Every sound outside grew unbearable. A step in the grass, a scrape against the siding, the creak of the roof as another one landed above them. At times, they swore the creatures hovered just above the ground, drifting closer, tilting their oversized heads, scrutinizing the terrified humans confined within. Hours stretched out like days, sweat pooled on foreheads, lanterns flickered low, and guns trembled in weary hands. Each glimpse of those glimmering eyes felt like a nightmare manifesting itself. The creatures remained voiceless, uttering not a single sound beyond their scratching, tapping, and the subtle thud of their bizarre, weightless movements. By midnight, the farmhouse had ceased being a home. It transformed into a fortress under siege, encircled by beings no bullet could harm. The family huddled together, their nerves frayed, whispering the question no one dared to articulate. What if they don't depart? The night dragged on, each hour more unbearable than the previous. The Sutton family and their guests scarcely breathed, attentive to the steady movements outside. Every time they believed the creatures had left, another pair of glowing eyes would materialize at a window, or claws would scrape against the fragile wood walls. The men fired repeatedly, the blasts reverberating in the confined space, but each time, the outcome remained unchanged. The beings fell back into the shadows, only to return mere moments later, unscathed. Bullets might as well have been pebbles cast into a river. Inside the house, fear solidified into sheer exhaustion. The adults whispered among themselves, their voices quivering. Should they flee for help? Should they attempt a mad dash for the cars parked outside? Yet, every time someone dared to glance towards the yard, they spied one of the creatures waiting, half revealed in the lantern's glow. The beings never lingered long enough to risk stepping outside. The children clutched their mothers, too terrified to cry any longer. One boy buried his face in his mother's dress, trembling with each jolt from the walls as another gunshot reverberated. The air bore the acrid scent of smoke and sweat, thick with fear. At one moment, Billy Ray stepped to the window, straining to peer beyond. A clawed hand emerged abruptly from the shadows, its elongated fingers brushing against the screen. In a panic, he shouted and fired at point-blank range, watching as the figure flipped backward. not burdened by mortal weight, but rather moving in a disconcerting, weightless manner, as if it had no place in this world. Silence enveloped them then. The family stood frozen, listening intently through the persistent ringing that filled their ears. It was then that the roof creaked once more. Something substantial, or perhaps multiple entities, shifted above them. A dragging sound scraped across the shingles. Slow and calculated. The lantern's light caught two luminous eyes peeking over the roof's edge, unwavering. Another shot fired, another figure recoiled, another harrowing return. The relentless siege seemed interminable. These beings refrained from forcing their way inside. They didn't shatter glass or rip apart doors. Their endurance was far more insidious, as though they aimed to wear the family down, siphoning their courage bit by bit. Their gaze, penetrating and inquisitive as they peered into the house, tilting their heads and pressing against the windows, exuded not the primal hunger of predators. It was a disquieting curiosity, a desire to understand. By the time the clock neared 3 o'clock in the morning, the family's spirit teetered on the brink of breaking. The guns had been discharged countless times, ammunition dwindling with each shot while the creatures continued to circle. The children, nearly asleep in their mother's arms, clung to the remnants of wakefulness, their petite bodies quivering even in dream. At that moment, the decision crystallized. They could no longer endure such torment. If they remained, survival through the night seemed uncertain. They waited for a lull, a fleeting moment when the yard appeared void of life, devoid of those glowing eyes watching from the darkened corners. Then, in a surge of desperate bravery, they gathered everyone together. The front door was flung open, and the entire family sprinted across the yard to the pair of cars parked in the drive. The night consumed them like a dark cloak. The grass whipped against their ankles, each step feeling like an interminable trek. Behind them, silence shattered, a rustle, a movement, and those glowing eyes emerged anew from the trees. Bodies piled into the cars, doors slamming shut, engines roaring to life. Gravel flew as the vehicles surged forward, racing down the dirt road toward the town of Hopkinsville. Only when the farmhouse vanished into the rearview mirror did they permit themselves to exhale, a collective release of tension. Words evaded them. Faces were ashen. The children huddled in the back seats, wide-eyed and alert, lingering in wait for scratching sounds on the windows. Upon reaching the police station, they burst through the doors, wild-eyed and shaking. Officers on duty initially regarded it as a jest, a large family prattling on about small men besieging their farmhouse, but the terror evident in their voices quelled any laughter. They stood trembling, exhausted, having clearly weathered something inexplicable. Within moments, a convoy of police vehicles, state troopers, and even a few members of the press followed the Suttons back to their farmhouse. Armed personnel stepped into the yard, illuminating the area with flashlights, rifles at the ready. The house bore the scars of conflict, riddled with bullet holes, its siding marred by gunfire. Inside, empty shell casings scattered across the floor, and yet the peculiar figures had vanished. Officers fanned out across the property. They discovered disturbed soil where something heavy had pressed upon the earth, yet no footprints were discernible, none that appeared human, at least. They scoured the woods, the fields. Even the roof. Nothing. Only a heavy silence, disturbed now and then by the nervous shifting of armed men. The Suttons endeavored to relay their tale, explaining the glowing eyes, the floating movements, the strange resistance to gunfire. The lawmen listened, but their skeptical gazes betrayed their doubts. Yet even the most hardened among them conceded that something had indeed instilled terror in this family, an experience real enough to drive 11 individuals, including children, into the night. For a period, the flashing lights of the patrol cars and the presence of armed officers provided the family with a semblance of comfort. But when the officers eventually packed up, reassured that there was nothing further to uncover, the Suttons found themselves once again in their battered farmhouse. They prayed that it was over, hoped the creatures had departed. Yet, as the last police car pulled away and the stillness of the Kentucky night settled in, fear began to creep back in. Deep down, they understood the unsettling truth. Whatever had visited their farmhouse had not concluded its business, and as the lanterns flickered to a low glow, the family attempted to find sleep, only to be roused again by the scratching sound upon the roof. As the police departed, a heavy quiet blanketed the Sutton farmhouse once more. Too quiet. No one dared to breathe above a whisper. As if mere sound might conjure the creatures back into their midst, the reality was they had not truly left. It began with that persistent scratching, soft yet deliberate. Everyone froze. Then there came the thud of something adjusting its weight, crawling. The flickering lantern light caught the faint silhouette of a head peeking over the roof's edge, those enormous, unblinking eyes glowing down upon them. Exhaustion washed over the family, but a tide of fear surged anew. Shots echoed once more, reverberating into the woods. The figure toppled, yet, much like before, it did not remain down. It glided away, weightless, its movement disturbingly puppet-like. Wrong. Another creature appeared at the window, its elongated claws tapping softly on the glass, as if mocking their terror. A child let forth a scream. Mothers pulled their little ones close, wrapping them in protection against the horrifying sight. Billy Ray shouted and fired through the screen. The luminous eyes winked out, but in the ensuing silence, more movements could be discerned rustling in the grass. It was as if the farmhouse found itself encircled once more. Dozens of beings drifted through the yard, circling, waiting, never rushing, never breaking in, merely biding their time. The hours elongated, dragging on exhaustively. Some family members claimed to have seen the creatures hovering just above the ground, bobbing slightly as though they were swimming through water rather than traversing solid earth. Others described their skin as glimmering faintly, almost metallic in the lantern's glow, and perpetually those eyes, piercing yellow-white orbs that seemed to see through walls into the very depths of souls. No one succumbed to sleep. They remained vigilant, eyes fixed on the windows, weapons gripped tightly, and prayers whispered in trembling breaths, hoping that the light of dawn would spell an end to their torment. Finally, a soft gray light seeped over the horizon. The sun rose languidly over the sprawling Kentucky fields, and with the first touch of daylight, the siege concluded. The mysterious figures evaporated into the woods, disappearing as if they had never existed. The scratching finally ceased, the windows remained unoccupied, and the yard surrendered once more to a profound stillness, save for the cicadas returning to weave their morning serenade. The family sagged wearily into their chairs, drained of all but a deep sense of relief. They had endured the night, but explanations eluded them. Investigators and reporters, arriving later that day, discovered a house marred by conflict. Bullet holes pocked the walls, and remainders of spent shells littered the floors. Witnesses recounted their experiences of glowing entities impervious to gunfire, of hours ensnared in unrelenting terror, and of a siege surpassing anything that could be conceived. Skeptics exchanged doubtful glances. Some suggested that the family had simply confused owls or monkeys for diminutive beings from another realm. Others peddled theories of hysteria, exaggeration, or perhaps the influence of alcohol. Yet, privately, the officers who had rushed to the scene that night confessed that something had profoundly unsettled the Suttons, a fear that transcended mere fright. It wasn't an elaborate ruse, nor solely pandemonium. As days ebbed into weeks, the family grappled with the aftermath, refusing to slip back into normalcy. Some members could not bear the thought of sleeping in the farmhouse again, haunted by the fear that the creatures might return. The children emerged from nightmares, shrieking about the luminous eyes that stared through the windows. The adults communicated in hushed tones, aware that many outsiders dismissed their accounts as fabrications. Yet, one detail lingered in all their minds: the manner in which the beings had engaged with them. They had not attempted to inflict harm nor violence. They simply observed, scrutinizing them with patience and curiosity, almost as if conducting a clinical study. The encounter felt less like an assault and more akin to an examination. The story circulated widely, woven through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and hushed conversations over kitchen tables. Dubbed the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins by some, or Little Green Men by others, the narrative became interwoven within the fabric of American UFO mythology, marking the first time extraterrestrial beings were vividly depicted as diminutive and radiant. But for the Sutton family, it transcended folklore. It resided within the realm of memory. Every creak in the night, every rustle on the roof rekindled the horror. And although the beings never returned, their unanswered question lingered like a specter. Why had they come? Were they accidental visitors from another world, drifting down into the Kentucky woods? Were they relics of a deeper, more enigmatic existence buried beneath the Earth's surface? Or had their selection of that solitary farmhouse been a chance to probe the boundaries of human dread? Proof remained elusive. There were no photographs, no cadavers, no footprints left to silence the skeptics. Only walls peppered with bullet scars, shaken witnesses, and a night that transformed into a horrific tale retold for generations. And in the silence of that farmhouse long after, as cicadas sang and the wind whispered through the grasses, the family insisted they could still sense it, the palpable weight of unseen eyes watching and waiting just beyond the tree line. Then, there was the Vors Park encounter in the autumn of 1989. The Soviet Union stood on the precipice of transformation. The policies of glasnost and perestroika began to peel back decades of enforced silence, ushering forth stories and voices that had long been suppressed. Across the vast expanse of the USSR, conversations flourished, blossoming around topics that had previously been taboo. Yet in Voronezh, situated 300 miles south of Moscow, the season's openness would take a surreal turn that would astonish not only the Soviet populace, but reverberate throughout the world. Voronezh, known for its industrial character and nestled along the banks of the Voronezh River, was a city defined by its factories, drab apartment blocks, and the green parks where children chased after dreams in the fading light of day. On the evening of September 27, 1989, a group of children congregated in South Park, a broad expanse of grass where trees stood sentinel and playground equipment awaited the laughter of youth. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, spreading golden hues across the skyline as families ambled through the park and children sent footballs spiraling across the field. It was at this moment that something extraordinary emerged in the sky. The children's innocence allowed them to notice first. A glowing red sphere floated high above the park, vibrant against the twilight canvas. Initially, they assumed it to be an aircraft of some sort, perhaps a weather balloon or a drifting illuminated object, but it moved with unsettling purpose. Gradually, with the children and several adults as witnesses, the bright sphere descended. The play in the park ceased abruptly. Dozens of children gazed upward, mouths agape, their footballs forgotten on the grass beneath them. The crimson glow intensified, casting elongated shadows across the open field. Parents, sensing the shift in atmosphere, uneasily called after their children, yet few stirred from their reverie. All attention remained fixed on the uncanny object as it moved with an unnatural grace. Then, before their astonished eyes, the orb completed a transformation. The radiant ball morphed and expanded, revealing a vast metallic craft. Observers later recounted its immense size, with a surface akin to burnished steel, soundlessly settling upon the ground. A gentle hiss escaped as the craft extended sturdy legs, touching down onto the grass. The air around them stilled, the typical city sounds faded into oblivion. All that lingered was the nervous hushed whispers of children, a blend of awe and fear. With a soft click, a hatch on the side of the craft swung open, and from within emerged beings that none of those children would ever dismiss from memory. The first figure to step forth loomed enormous. Witnesses described it as standing at least 3 meters tall, far above the stature of any child present. Its form was humanoid, clad in a resplendent silvery suit that mirrored the brilliant glow emanating from the craft. Its head appeared encased in a helmet or a featureless mask, its eyes dark and unblinking, imbued with an unsettling intensity. Trailing behind, another tall figure followed, equally imposing, its proportions elongated and distinctly otherworldly. But that was only the beginning. A smaller figure materialized beside them, compact and mechanical, resembling a robot. It moved with jerky motions, its limbs rigid, as though functioning under strict programming. The astonished onlookers, a mix of children and adults, gasped. Some cried out in alarm, while others stood immobilized, unable to process what was unfolding. The colossal beings descended heavily onto the earth, their presence dominating the twilight landscape. One of the towering figures halted, methodically scanning the park with a purposeful turn of its head. Then, in a deliberate manner, it raised a hand which clutched a slender rod-like device. Without any forewarning, it aimed the mysterious object at a boy positioned near the front of the crowd. In a heartbeat, the boy vanished. An immediate wave of panic surged through the park, causing children to scream. Parents surged forward in a frenzy. Some fled in terror, while others remained, mesmerized by the bizarre spectacle. Eyewitnesses later recounted that the boy had seemingly evaporated into thin air, as if erased from existence itself. For what seemed an eternity, he was simply gone. The imposing being stood unmoving, as if observing the chaos it had incited. Then, abruptly, the boy re-emerged in the exact spot from which he disappeared, appearing unharmed yet visibly shaken. The crowd erupted into cries of fear and disbelief. Another observer later mentioned that several onlookers felt a peculiar pressure in their minds, as if their very thoughts were being compressed. Others expressed the sensation of being rooted to the ground, paralyzed not by terror, but by some invisible force. For several minutes, the extraordinary scene unfolded in an eerie silence. The magnificent beings moved ponderously across the field, their immense steps leaving deep impressions in the earth. The small robotic figure trailed behind, scanning the terrain with mechanical precision. Children huddled together, clutching each other tightly, their eyes wide in fright. Adults whispered prayers, their uncertainty about the reality of the situation palpable. Then, without further warning, the beings pivoted and began to return to their craft. The hatch reopened once again, and they stepped inside. The smaller figure followed suit, disappearing into the metal shadows within. The crimson glow intensified as the craft ascended from the park. The legs retracted seamlessly, and the colossal structure rose soundlessly into the air. The red sphere of light reformed around the craft, its brightness growing until it shot upward, vanishing from view in mere seconds. Silence enveloped South Park. The grass where the craft had settled lay scorched and flattened. Children sobbed as parents held their sons and daughters tightly, dozens of eyes glued to the empty sky above. For those who had witnessed the event, there was no ambiguity. They had encountered something beyond belief. A craft had touched down, entities had emerged, and a boy had seemingly disappeared right before their eyes. This was no fleeting rumor or mere figment of imagination. It had unfolded publicly in a park, witnessed by a multitude of terrified residents of Varan. In the moments following the craft's ascent, South Park descended into chaos. Parents clutched their children closely, chastising them through their tears, while others simply stood fixated on the scorched earth where the giant figures had loomed just moments ago. A group of boys conspired in hushed tones, their voices quivering, each insisting they had experienced the same extraordinary phenomena. A red sphere, beings taller than the trees, and a boy who had both vanished and reappeared. The children's panic quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. That evening, families who had been witnesses recounted their experiences to relatives, friends, and neighbors. In Varan, accounts of the peculiar landing proliferated, moving rapidly from one apartment block to another. By the following morning, dozens of witnesses, including many schoolchildren, were openly discussing the extraordinary events that had unfolded in the park. Several adults who had been present corroborated the accounts. A woman out walking her dog had seen the red sphere descend and morph into the metallic craft. A father, having come to collect his son, vividly described the towering beings, their silvery suits aglow. The boy who had briefly vanished was reported to have emerged shaken yet unharmed. Physical evidence from the site garnered attention as well. At the landing spot, patches of grass lay flattened in a perfect circle. Soil bore signs of scorching as though subjected to intense heat. Nearby trees exhibited broken branches, cleanly snapped at odd angles, though no storm had swept through the area. Children returned to the park the subsequent day, eagerly pointing out the marks, eager to showcase the scars of their encounter. It did not take long for the local press to take notice. On October 2, 1989, the regional newspaper Varansky Communist published an article detailing the strange incident. The piece included interviews from both children and adults, all echoing identical descriptions: a glowing red sphere, a massive craft, towering humanoids, and a boy who had momentarily vanished. Several children even produced drawings depicting the beings inside the ship. Their sketches, remarkably similar despite being created independently, rendered figures that were always enormous, humanoid but distinctly alien, with elongated forms and faceless helmets. The craft was consistently illustrated as a grand metallic dome descending amidst a sphere of red light. This article rapidly gained momentum, drawing attention beyond Varan. What set this case apart was not merely the extensive number of witnesses, but also the fact that a local Soviet newspaper had boldly chosen to publish the story with such transparency. For decades, under the constraints of Soviet secrecy, tales of UFO sightings had been dismissed, buried, or regarded as figments of capitalist fantasy. However, in the late 1980s during Glasnost, such accounts began to be printed, and in this instance, they were published not as rumors, but as explicit narratives for thousands to peruse. The story took a significant turn when the official Soviet news agency TASS picked it up. Within days, their reports announced that giant humanoid aliens had landed in a Voron park, witnessed by both children and adults. They referenced the scorched earth at the site, the consistent witness testimonies, and the boy's mysterious disappearance. This was not a fringe report nor a whisper of gossip. It was broadcast by the Soviet Union's state-run news agency. The world began to pay attention. Newspapers across Europe and North America picked up on the TASS report. Headlines ranged from tempered intrigue to outright derision. The New York Times published the account, noting with skepticism that official Soviet media had reported extraterrestrials walking in a local park. The Guardian in London featured a piece highlighting the Voron visitors, while tabloids plastered their front pages with sensational drawings of enormous aliens. For citizens of the Soviet Union, this narrative was particularly shocking. Generations had been nurtured in an environment where information was stringently regulated, with seldom any acknowledgement in the press of unexplained phenomena. Suddenly, state-controlled media was not just permitting, but actively promoting reports of a UFO encounter. Some speculated this development was a sign of newfound transparency under Gorbachev's reforms. Others wondered whether this indicated that the authorities possessed knowledge they were reluctant to share. Detractors, both domestically and internationally, were quick to offer counter-arguments. Some theorized that mass hysteria among the children could have been instigated by a meteor or an unusual atmospheric occurrence. Others referred to the possibility of a practical joke. However, they failed to explain how such a prank could generate scorched earth, consistent sketches, or identical testimonies from numerous witnesses. Even among Soviet scientists, opinions were split. A team of scholars from the Voron Geophysical Institute assessed the site, reporting that the soil exhibited abnormal compression levels and that radiation readings were slightly elevated compared to normal conditions. Despite these findings, no conclusive explanation was reached. Some academics dismissed the entire episode as mere fantasy. Professor Sergei Dolguchev from the Moscow Institute of Physics was quoted asserting that children's imaginations are inherently fertile, warning against conflating fairy tales with science. Yet, others cautioned against such dismissals, arguing that the volume of witnesses could not simply be overlooked. One Voron scientist contended that we cannot easily explain this away. For the children who had experienced the event, there was no question. They steadfastly asserted that the astonishing sight they encountered was real. They recounted the eerie red glow flooding the park, the colossal figures striding across the grass, and the boy who had vanished before their eyes. Their accounts, captured during school interviews and later recounted to journalists, bore the weight of those who had been genuinely frightened, not amused. The Voronezhsky communist media continued to pursue the story, interviewing parents and neighbors. Several admitted to initial skepticism until they witnessed the terror etched in their children's expressions. One mother shared her anxiety, recounting her son's truthfulness. She had never seen him so pale as when he returned home that night. He could not sleep or eat, repeatedly articulating that they were so big, Mama, so big. The TASS report ensured that the Voron incident could not be brushed aside. In contrast to countless other UFO narratives relinquished to hearsay in Soviet kitchens or buried within military archives, this one was now documented and read by millions. Unlike many Western sightings characterized by solitary witnesses in desolate settings, this event had unfolded publicly in a park, witnessed by a multitude of children and adults. It was as if the unknown had deliberately chosen the most overt stage conceivable. When the story transcended Voron, gaining international traction through the TASS agency, it sparked a reaction unparalleled by other UFO accounts from the late Cold War era. In Western media, it was met with a curious blend of fascination, ridicule, and disquiet. Newspapers that routinely ignored local Soviet news suddenly found themselves reporting on giant aliens inhabiting a Russian park. What made this situation unique was not merely that witnesses reported odd beings. Such narratives existed in every corner of the globe. What distinguished Voron was the fact that the Soviet state news agency had itself disseminated the report, citing numerous children and adults as witnesses and detailing physical anomalies in the soil and surrounding area. For readers in the West, this raised troubling inquiries. Why would the USSR, with its legacy of suppressing eccentric tales, suddenly amplify one of the most sensational accounts of them all? Doubtful commentators suggested the TASS report might serve as a tool of propaganda, perhaps intended to divert attention from pressing political issues. Yet the timing felt peculiar. The late 1980s marked a period of increased transparency, coinciding with Gorbachev's reforms aimed at enhancing credibility with both domestic citizens and the international community. Why jeopardize that credibility by publishing such an absurd account, ripe for mockery? If it was indeed a diversionary tactic, it appeared clumsy at best. Others maintained that the Voron landing had simply been too conspicuous to conceal. With dozens of witnesses, including schoolchildren, openly sharing their experiences with the media and detailed physical evidence documented, the prospect of suppressing the story entirely would have counteracted the Glasnost initiative. Perhaps it was wiser to report on it and allow the interpretations to unfold organically. International UFO researchers took hold of the case. In France, Britain, and the United States, organizations meticulously cataloged witness accounts and scrutinized translations of the TASS report. The children's drawings circulated widely, striking for their uniformity: the red sphere, towering figures clad in silvery suits, and a robot-like companion. Although simplistic in their execution, the images radiated a sincerity that was hard to dismiss. Scientists engaged in intense debate. Some posited it was a classic instance of mass hysteria, where children's imaginations fueled one another's enthusiasm until fantasy blurred into reality. Others, however, pointed to the concrete evidence: the scorched grass, flattened earth, and broken branches. Such details could not solely stem from imaginative play. Interviews with the children conducted weeks afterward revealed no decline in their testimonies. One boy reiterated that it was so big, taller than a tree. A girl described how her legs felt weighted down, as if glued to the ground. Another child confided that the being's dark eyes had instilled in him a sensation of disappearing. These narratives, differing in detail yet united by a shared sense of fear, intimated that something significant had indelibly imprinted on their memories. In Voron itself, the story endured. For years, the children who had been present recounted it with a blend of pride and unease. Some steered clear of the park, unable to escape the haunting image of the red sphere plummeting from the sky. Others clung to the recollection, sketching the craft in their notebooks and sharing tales with new generations about the day giants descended upon their city. Parents also carried the memory. Many had expressed initial skepticism. Yet the sheer terror reflected on their children's faces was an indelible impression. Local investigators remarked how the Voron incident stood distinctly apart from other Soviet accounts. For decades, UFO sightings in the USSR had been confined to guarded military archives, passed along in whispers among pilots, or dismissed in the realm of local gossip. Here, in the very center of a bustling city, before the gaze of numerous witnesses, an event unfolded that defied denial. It was, in a sense, a communal haunting, an enigma belonging not to a single family or an isolated aviator, but to an entire community. The international media, while captivated, ultimately relegated the case to mere curiosity. By the early 1990s, Western outlets often mentioned Voron only as a footnote in lists cataloging the most peculiar UFO sightings. Yet in Russia, the memory retained its fervor. The city's name became synonymous with the inexplicable in the same manner that Roswell had achieved in America. Some scholars pondered the symbolism inherent in the event. What prompted the appearance in a children's park? Why the daylight visibility devoid of any shroud of secrecy? Was it a deliberate act, a display intended to evoke fear or awe, or was it inadvertent? A byproduct of a mission uninterested in the presence of human witnesses? The effects of paralysis, the boy who vanished, and the oppressive stillness of the beings all implied a demonstration of might, one that required no verbal communication. Others contemplated the historical context. The year 1989 marked the twilight of the Soviet Union, a nation teetering on the brink of disintegration. The atmosphere was steeped in uncertainty, fear, and latent promise. To many, the Varon episode epitomized that tumultuous period. An incomprehensible phenomenon emerging abruptly, shattering the monotony of ordinary life and evaporating without a trace, leaving behind only emotional scars and a multitude of questions. For the children who gathered in that park, the recollection was not merely symbolic, but a stark and painful reality. Decades later, some chose to share their experiences with local journalists, asserting that what they had witnessed had not diminished in their memories. They could still vividly recall the red illumination, still experience the chilling presence of the giants looming above them. The boy who had briefly vanished carried with him the haunting recollection of being eradicated for an instant in the midst of his friends. Although unharmed, he often spoke of the lingering dread that accompanied him, the intangible sensation that something had brushed against him beyond human comprehension. The Vors Park landing continues to stand out as one of the most eerie incidents in contemporary UFO history, precisely because it transpired openly, in plain sight, before dozens of witnesses. It was not concealed in an isolated forest, not murmured by a solitary pilot, nor shrouded in military confidentiality. It represented a spectacle observed by children immersed in play and parents returning home. An ordinary day was abruptly interrupted by the extraordinary. Now, what persists is not solely the inquiry into the identity of those beings, but the question of their purpose. They offered no clarion explanation, no discernible message. Instead, they showcased their authority, instilled fear, and departed. The silence they left in their wake was as haunting as their presence. The scorched earth eventually rejuvenated. The broken branches fell away, fading from memory. However, in the minds of those who experienced it, the park remains a deeply engraved mark. They recall the descent of the red sphere, the giants trudging heavily across the grass, the vanishing boy, and the sudden stillness as the craft descended. In Voron, the account is neither myth nor fable. It is a memory upheld by those who adamantly insist that for a few fleeting minutes in 1989, the mundane world was pierced by the extraordinary. And, as with all such encounters, the most disquieting truth is the simplest one. If it occurred once, it is entirely possible that it could happen again. The Isla de Obo sighting, which took place on the 28th of October in 1972, adds another layer to this narrative. Situated off the tranquil southern shores of Uruguay, Isla de Obo, a small rocky outcrop, served as the backdrop for an event that would echo into the future. On that calm night, gentle waves rhythmically lapped against the rugged coastline of Isla de Obo. From the vantage point of the lighthouse, two keepers observed the moon's silvery reflection shimmer across the expanse of the Atlantic. As the clock approached midnight, it was time for their customary inspection. Positioned approximately 8 kilometers from the coastal city of Punta del Este, Isla de Obo was relatively quiet and largely uninhabited. Its most prominent structure, the 59-meter-tall lighthouse, had served as a guiding light for over a century, assisting vessels navigating the southern Atlantic. Only dedicated lighthouse keepers, sailors on rotation, and marine biologists frequented the island. On that evening, keepers Walter Lopez and Carlos Torres were joined by a young Navy sub-lieutenant named Julio Castro, temporarily stationed there for routine monitoring. The three men had just completed their second evening inspection when the radio emitted a cascade of static, a common occurrence in such a remote location. But then they heard a peculiar low hum resonating outside the sturdy concrete walls of the lighthouse. Lopez hesitated and turned to Torres, who had also taken note of the unusual sound. It didn't resemble mechanical noise or marine activity, not the gentle cadence of a passing vessel or the whir of a generator. It was tonal, a sound that seemed to rise and swell. Stepping outside, they were greeted by the crispness of the air. But what captivated their attention was the sudden silence blanketing the ocean. The rhythmic crashing of waves had ceased almost unnaturally. Even the seabirds that typically circled the tower in restless flocks were conspicuously absent. Then, from just beyond the cliffs at the eastern edge of the island, a pale dome of light began to ascend from the sea. The object hovered approximately 200 meters above the waterline. It was sizable, about 30 meters in diameter, perfectly spherical with a dome atop. Its glow was soft bluish white and emitted no warmth. The object remained silent as it floated, devoid of engines or vibrations. Castro, trained in naval observation, instinctively reached for his binoculars and focused in, seeking clarity amidst the overwhelming strangeness. The object displayed a metallic sheen, akin to polished silver, with an absence of visible seams or markings. Beneath it, a cylindrical beam of white light gracefully descended, methodically scanning the ocean's surface in sweeping arcs. At precisely 0:30, Torres communicated with the Uruguayan Navy Command stationed at Punta del Este. His tone remained steady, yet crisp, a blend of formal detachment and underlying agitation. He conveyed the sighting of a remarkable aerial phenomenon, distinctly unconventional and remaining fixed above the water. Command promptly instructed the men to maintain vigilance and document every possible detail. A log was initiated without delay. As the light probe traced the water's surface, Lopez recounted a peculiar observation. Something appeared to respond beneath the waves. He later described it as resembling boiling water, though not due to heat, but rather as if something was darting swiftly just below the surface. Captivated by the beam, the object loitered for an additional 10 minutes. Then, with astonishing abruptness, it ascended vertically, shooting straight into the night sky, vanishing from sight within moments. There was no accompanying sonic blast, merely silence. All three men submitted their accounts within hours. By the early hours of the morning, a patrol boat was dispatched to Isla de Obos. Later that day, Commander Luis Galeano, a naval investigator, arrived to gather physical evidence. He scrutinized the neighboring cliffs and conducted radiation assessments that showed levels slightly above the norm, albeit not alarmingly so. No signs of combustion. Debris or mechanical activity were identified. Yet, the lighthouse log, co-signed by the trio of witnesses, contained specific timestamps and detailed descriptions. Each narrative aligned perfectly, capturing the object's form, behavior, and velocity. Throughout the questioning process, none of the men faltered. Castro, in particular, was characterized as exhibiting precise military clarity in his recounting. In an unusual move, the Uruguayan Navy opted for transparency, publicly acknowledging the incident. They issued a statement confirming that a non-identified aerial object had been observed by qualified personnel at Isla de Obos, leading to the initiation of an investigation. While no definitive conclusions were drawn, the Navy's willingness to disclose this incident reverberated across South America. Reporters from Montevideo and Buenos Aires quickly seized upon the story. The newspapers La Mañana and El País featured it prominently on their front pages. Radio hosts interviewed retired Navy personnel, some of whom alluded enigmatically to similar past incidents that had remained under wraps. It was one of the rare occasions when a military body in Latin America openly admitted to an active inquiry into UFOs. However, the narrative did not conclude there. A week later, a separate Navy vessel patrolling the same waters reported peculiar sonar activity near Isla de Obos. Lieutenant Manuel Oruribe, serving aboard the Rio Negro, described the sonar readout as that of a large, rapidly moving object underwater, resembling a torpedo but far broader. They tracked this entity for nearly 5 minutes before it inexplicably vanished without a trace. No surfacing, no sign of departure. That sonar analysis was discreetly appended to the Isla de Obos file. Months later, independent researchers from Brazil and Argentina descended upon the site. Utilizing thermal imaging and electromagnetic sensors, they unearthed residual anomalies in the ground near the eastern cliffs, areas where soil exhibited unusual compression and magnetization, despite the absence of any buried man-made structures or equipment. Even more perplexing was the testimony from a former Navy officer leaked years afterwards. He claimed a fourth witness, a radio technician stationed offshore, had detected high-frequency bursts during the event, akin to coded signals, although no formal logs recorded such activity at the time. In the ensuing years, the Uruguayan Air Force received several additional reports from fishing vessels close to Isla de Obos. These encompassed sightings of luminous orbs entering and exiting the sea alongside bizarre radar signatures devoid of visible aircraft. Each account resonated with the occurrences of that night in 1972. Despite the public intrigue, no formal follow-up inquiry was undertaken by the government following the initial investigation. Explanations were conspicuously lacking. There were no mentions of weather balloons or experimental aircraft. The file was ultimately closed without resolution. Skeptics contended that the sighting was likely a misidentified aircraft or a natural phenomenon, such as ball lightning. However, experts countered that the dimensions of the object, its ability to hover, and its rapid acceleration did not align with any known technology or meteorological phenomena, especially as described by trained military observers. To this day, the Isla de Lobos sighting stands as one of the most reliable and officially recognized UFO incidents in South America. The Navy's forthrightness, the uniformity of the witness accounts, and the accompanying physical data have rendered it a benchmark case for both UFO enthusiasts and military historians. What renders this case even more extraordinary is its quiet resilience. In stark contrast to the sensationalized accounts of Roswell or Rendlesham, it has simply persisted within the official records, uncontested, unaltered, and unexplained. Even now, on certain clear evenings, lighthouse keepers at Isla de Lobos continue to gaze out towards the horizon, pondering whether the luminous beam might once again return. And nestled within the archives of the Uruguayan Navy, deep inside a secured cabinet, resides a manila folder bearing the label, quote, Darots. On the 28th of October, 1972, a chronicle of one unassuming night on a tranquil island unfolded when an unknown presence ventured close and departed, leaving behind only a multitude of questions. The Tindouf Desert Glider, 1999, Tindouf Province, Algeria. The desert's light was fading. An orange sun sank behind the gentle hills of Algeria's Tindouf Province, casting long, sharp shadows across the UN convoy. 5 vehicles advanced in a single line across the gravel wash, their engines humming steadily beneath a waning sky. Dust clung tenaciously to the tires, swirling into the air like smoke. The Saharan twilight was serene, yet pulsating with an undercurrent of tension. Every aid worker instinctively understood the Western Sahara was in a perpetual state of unease. Conflict between Morocco and the Polisario front simmered beneath the surface of the region, resembling a hidden flame waiting for the right moment to ignite. Inside the lead vehicle, Dr. Marie Bouchard, an experienced medical officer with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, went over her clipboard with meticulous attention before adjusting the radio dial. A dissonant buzz of static filled the air as she tapped her headset, calling for a convoy check. "Unit 5, respond." Silence answered her. Attempting once more, she was met with a harsher burst of white noise. This frequency disruption was troubling. Their communication had been consistently clear over the previous 80 kilometers. She glanced into the rearview mirror, squinting to identify the last truck in the line, but the swirling dust cloaked everything behind her. That is when the shadow caught her eye. It didn't move like a typical cloud or aircraft. It glided through the dusk with a languid grace she had never witnessed before. A perfectly crafted black triangle passed overhead, wider than any of the vehicles beneath it, eclipsing the twilight as it traversed the sky in eerie silence. In that moment, the radio fell silent. The convoy halted abruptly, as if the very desert exhaled. What had commenced as an ordinary routine morphed into something surreal. In early March of 1999, a United Nations relief convoy was dispatched from Tindouf, tasked with delivering essential supplies to the remote Sahrawi refugee camps spreading across western Algeria. The team comprised 16 members, aid workers, drivers, and 2 Algerian military escorts, alongside a technical officer managing the satellite uplink that maintained contact with the regional command in Algiers. They left the forward base in the late afternoon, aiming to reach the last checkpoint before nightfall. With favorable weather, GPS navigation, and 5 fully equipped Toyota Land Cruisers, the mission appeared straightforward. Yet, around 6:40 p.m., as the sun sank below the jagged horizon, anomalies began to disrupt their journey. First came the static on the radios. While such phenomena were common in desert terrains caused by magnetic disturbances or dry atmospheric pressures, it usually lasted only a brief moment. This time, however, the interference persisted. The satellite phone in the command vehicle couldn't establish a connection. The internal communication systems faltered, rebooting sporadically as the GPS units recalibrated 3 times in a mere span of 5 minutes. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Thus described later by Don Verhoeven, a Dutch logistics officer traveling in the 3rd vehicle, it was as though an unseen pressure enveloped them, raising the hairs along their arms without any chill. It felt as if an unseen gaze were penetrating the windshield. Initially, when someone glanced upward, they presumed it was merely a low cloud, but the figure revealed distinctive edges, sharp and defined. With no sound, no propulsion, and no visible signs of mechanical operation, the object descended through the twilight sky, its mass gliding smoothly and eerily silent. Witnesses would later depict it as a black triangle, a thick shadow, or as if the night sky itself had unhinged and shifted to the side. Hovering roughly 300 meters above the ground, estimating its dimensions became a perplexing endeavor. Verhoeven approximated the span to be 100 meters wide, while others ventured even larger guesses. Regardless, it completely obstructed the sky overhead, maintaining its steady movement. The convoy froze in place, Bashar stepping out of her vehicle, soon followed by other drivers and support personnel. All 5 trucks stood motionless in the sand, as if captivated by an intangible force. The triangle drifted overhead, gradually rotating and shifting southeast. It cast an unequivocal shadow upon the ground, a visual patch of darkness so symmetrical that it appeared choreographed with the object above. All gazes were fixated in silence. There was no engine roar, no thunderous expulsion, not even the gentle hum of high-altitude flights. Only silence, thick and pervasive, as if nature itself had paused to behold its passage. Then, as if on cue, the systems failed. The dashboard lights flickered out. Radios waned into quietude, and one of the vehicles, Unit 5, coughed, sputtered, then switched off entirely. Upon later examination, its battery proved fully charged, yet the starter refused to engage. A field medic would later note in a private account, "I felt a weight in my chest, not pain, but pressure. It was akin to a vacuum, as if the noise of the air had been stripped away, supplanted by a palpable presence. It mirrored the instinctive freezing of animals sensing a predator's gaze." As the craft passed overhead, shadows withdrew. The convoy, immobilized in the sand, remained transfixed. Not a single person moved. Some crouched beside their tires, while others stood frozen next to their vehicles. Not from fear, but from a deeper sensation: wonder. And then, just as effortlessly as it had arrived, the object receded from view. It didn't accelerate or vanish, but simply shifted until its form melded back with the horizon and disappeared from sight. After roughly 10 minutes, the systems rebooted. One by one, dashboard lights flickered back to life, radios crackled with sudden static, and the GPS units recalibrated. Unit 5 restarted without the need for assistance. The ensuing 20 minutes were filled with silence, void of words. When they finally arrived at the checkpoint shortly after 7:30 p.m., the Algerian liaison officer inquired as to their delay. Initially, they stood in silence, unsure how to respond. Eventually, one of the drivers mentioned that they had paused for a while. However, they refrained from reporting the incident, at least not in an official capacity. The field guidelines offered little clarity regarding unexplained aerial phenomena, and documenting such an encounter could prompt inquiries they could not satisfactorily address. Their paramount concern remained security and the humanitarian mission. Yet, within 48 hours, several team members had privately recorded their experiences. Dr. Buchard penned a comprehensive account in her journal, which later emerged among her personal belongings. Verhoeven's report, crafted as a PDF field entry, circulated informally among humanitarian workers in the vicinity. Even Joaquin Diaz captured an audio memo on a mini tape recorder the night of the experience, simply labeled Desert March 99. What linked all their accounts was not only the unsettling silence of the object, but also the overwhelming sense that it was watching them. It drifted above us like a manta ray. Bouchard wrote, "Sweeping and unbothered by our existence beneath it." Yet it wielded purpose. The technical logs served as the only concrete anomalies in a puzzle that transcended mere explanation. After the mission's conclusion, the convoy maintenance teams meticulously examined the onboard vehicle data as part of their customary procedures. 3 trucks produced matching readings, each chillingly recorded an engine-off duration of approximately 16 minutes at exactly the same moment. Strikingly, eyewitness accounts consistently maintained that the sighting could not have lasted more than 5 minutes. This 11-minute discrepancy in vehicle silence loomed ominously, arousing quiet concern. No other entries in the logs hinted at a power drain or malfunctions in the systems. The batteries were intact. The electronics operated as expected. It was as if time had been ensnared in a dimension of disrupted continuity. Moreover, the GPS units registered positional jumps that contradicted the known route. One vehicle inaccurately logged itself as stationary 400 meters north of its actual placement. Another unexpectedly went dark, vanishing from the grid before inexplicably reappearing mere seconds later. Yet, these irregularities never underwent formal investigation. Rumors about the sighting slowly trickled into the expansive UN network. A handful of regional directors caught wind of whispers regarding the triangle and the glider, yet there was no collective inquiry. In the year 2000, a Belgian non-profit organization known as World Eyes on Peace published a confidential report detailing unusual atmospheric and aerial phenomena encountered during field deployments. Tindouf appeared as a case study, heavily redacted. Verhoeven's journal entries featured prominently, albeit anonymously quoted. Requests for satellite data were made but went unanswered. Then emerged the leak, an email from 2012 revealing a whistleblower from the UNHCR who exposed a private exchange between mission coordinators referencing the glider incident in Zone E. A chilling line read, "If it returns, it must not coincide with civilian drop points. Not again." Additionally, there was the pilot, a private aircraft traversing through the Casablanca FR flight information region on the evening of March 22, 1999, who reported a near miss with a dark mass hovering over southwestern Algeria. The report, documented with Moroccan civil aviation authorities, clarified that the object lacked a transponder, did not display collision lights, and was absent from radar. The pilot estimated its dimensions to be larger than any aircraft he had ever witnessed. This account was archived, with no follow-up recorded. What then was the triangle? Theories diverged between advanced military stealth and non-human intelligence. Some speculated it might have been a next-generation surveillance platform, perhaps American, perhaps Russian, operating in disputed territories. However, its movement seemed too silent, too deliberate. It generated no heat signature, produced no noise, and disrupted electronics at close range without activating any electromagnetic alarms. Others proposed a more exotic explanation. The black triangle phenomena had been reported in Belgium, the Hudson Valley, and particular regions of Brazil, yet none had exhibited such profound electromagnetic disruption, nor such a slow, contemplative traversal. But why would it choose to appear above a UN convoy, non-combatants engaged in a humanitarian mission? This question particularly haunted Boucher. "We weren't a threat," she articulated. "We weren't even significant." Nevertheless, it loomed above us with the serene assurance of something that understood precisely what it was doing and exactly where we were located. The Tindouf Desert Glider remains a subject without confirmation, acknowledgement, or resolution. No government claims knowledge or ownership. No official files have been disclosed, yet the witnesses remain, bearing the memories. In hushed conversations, fragmented journal entries, and neglected backup drives tucked away in desk drawers, their experiences endure. A black triangle, silent, expansive, observing, vanished without a trace. The Lannerin Lake Constance incident unfolded on October 12, 1971. In Langen, Baden-Württemberg, West Germany, the waters of Lake Constance rarely disturb after dusk. On those windless autumn evenings, the surface transforms into a glassy mirror, so tranquil it perfectly reflects the sky above, making the stars seem to float just beneath the surface. On such a night, Tuesday, October 12, 1971, something quietly transpired above the lake. The sky was clear, moonless, and as the temperature descended into the low teens, Border Police Officer Ralph Dan, stationed on the second-floor balcony of the Langan Customs House, completed his routine shift notes beneath a solitary reading lamp. The building, positioned directly along the waterline, was part of a post-war joint surveillance arrangement between West Germany and Switzerland. Dan had served in this role for 7 years, his tenure marked by no significant breaches worth reporting. Yet that night, his attention was captured by something unordinary. From the periphery of his vision, a glow appeared low over the lake, not originating from the horizon, but hovering higher than the running lamps of a passing vessel. Pausing his writing, he set his pen down and stepped outside. The soft illumination hovered above the still water, approximately 100 meters from the shore and at a height indistinguishable from the surface beneath. It swayed not, pulsed not, nor did it resemble any aircraft or atmospheric phenomenon he had ever witnessed. Initially, Dan contemplated the possibility of a misidentified aircraft light, perhaps a helicopter, but the absence of sound rendered this hypothesis implausible. And its shape defied conventional aeronautics. Elliptical in form, softly aglow from within, it hovered with an uncanny stillness. The air was so quiet that any rotor noise should have echoed clearly, yet silence permeated the night. The object drifted laterally a few meters and then stilled again, as if tethered to an invisible anchor. Alarmed yet composed, Dan leaned over the balcony railing and called down to his colleague, Officer Hartwig Steiner, who then emerged from the lower floor entryway. Within moments, Dan gestured toward the glow. Together, they observed it in silence, alternating between the naked eye and a pair of binoculars kept at the desk for shoreline inspections. Steiner later recounted that the light emitted not like a searchlight, but as though the very air surrounding it was softly illuminated. It projected no beam and cast no shadow upon the water's surface, yet it remained distinctly visible against the backdrop of the stars. For more than 4 minutes, the object persisted, stationary, unwavering, unflinching. Then, without a hint of forewarning or a perceptible surge in momentum, the object tilted vertically and soared into the sky, vanishing into the inky dark within mere moments. There was neither a trace left behind nor a sound to mark its departure, only a profound silence where it had been. The officers acted swiftly. Dan made an immediate entry into his internal log and promptly contacted the Regional Air Traffic Control Center in Friedrichshafen, situated approximately 13 kilometers to the west. The response was unambiguous. No scheduled flights had been recorded passing through that sector, and no aircraft had been noted in that corridor for several hours. Civilian radar, too, detected nothing coinciding with the time frame of the sighting. The following morning, both officers completed formal incident reports for submission to the Bundesgrenzschutz Federal Border Guard. Within 36 hours, a discreet review was set in motion. An investigator from Stuttgart reported to the customs house to interview the officers. Each officer underwent questioning separately and was asked to sketch their impressions of what they had witnessed. Despite their different artistic styles, the resulting drawings were remarkably similar in shape, size, and their positioning above the lake. The internal inquiry was succinct and yielded no definitive conclusions. On October 16th, a typed memo from the Ministry of the Interior reached the officers' hands, stating that no known aircraft activity corresponded with their observation. Weather and astronomical factors were deemed non-contributory. Thus, the incident was filed away without further action. The memo included no indication of follow-up or any suggestion of misperception, merely a calm resolution. Yet the officers were not alone in their experience that night. Later that week, a civilian technician named Klaus Betz, who ran a modest radio repair shop from a boat shed 3 kilometers down the shoreline, reported a fleeting yet unusual interference while assessing VHF signal clarity near the lake. In a note he later forwarded to a regional bulletin, Betz described experiencing an abrupt burst of static that swept across all signal bands, followed by eerie silence. There was no return frequency. No oscillation to be found. Upon stepping outside to adjust the antenna alignment, he caught sight of what he characterized as a warm-hued light ascending directly upward. Although he did not file a formal report, the note found its place in the records of a local technicians' guild journal. Across the water in the Swiss lakeside town of Rorschach, an elderly woman walking her dog near the water's edge relayed to her neighbor that she had witnessed what looked like a small sun rising from the lake before it disappeared into the sky. Her account was never officially documented, but it materialized years later in a local oral history archive. This assortment of loosely associated reports, all lacking coordination yet echoing the same upward movement, eventually caught the attention of a NATO liaison officer stationed in Boden-Wehrberg. According to a 1995 article in Aviation Review Europe, the Langan sighting was briefly included in a confidential session concerning uncorrelated visual radar anomalies across Central Europe. However, no formal investigation ensued. The matter was shelved and archived without any additional records. More than a decade later, in 1983, a request similar to FOA filed under Germany's early information laws returned a file mentioning the Langen incident. The document held scant details, comprising only Dan and Steiner's hand-drawn sketches alongside a solitary internal memo with sections redacted. That memo indicated phenomena observed from a fixed position by trained personnel, with no radar validation present. The visual description diverged from meteorological or astronomical objects, and no atmospheric anomalies were logged. The case was not elevated to NATO command. By that juncture, the event had blurred into obscurity. The customs house had since transformed into a historical exhibit focused on regional border history. The second-floor balcony, where Dan once stood, remains intact, its latch rusty, with a view that has undergone little change in 5 decades. Dan retired in 1993, and in a rare local interview 8 years later, he recounted the sighting with vividness. "We did not witness something ambiguous. We observed something tangible. It was neither an aircraft nor an illusion of light, and we both bore witness to the same event. I still remain uncertain about its nature." The case did not make national headlines. It garnered no sensationalism. The incident simply lingered where it had begun, in the stillness shared by 2 trained men, a dark lake, and a silent enigma that entered and exited without acknowledgement. For contemporary researchers of Cold War-era sightings, the Langan incident is notable for its understated nature. It is precisely the restraint in the reports, the methodical detailing, the collected tone, and the absence of speculation that bestow the event with its credibility. There existed no hysteria, no UFO frenzy, only a thorough, consistent, and unexplained occurrence in a location characterized by its tranquil monotony. Thus, it was documented, and then it was consigned to the archives, yet the object they beheld that night exhibited behaviors that no known aircraft, whether civilian or military, could replicate at the time. The abrupt vertical ascent, the silence, the stationary hovering devoid of visible means of lift, and the lack of radar traces remained a mystery without resolution. No additional sightings emerged, no further reports were issued. The lake, true to form, reverted to its serene state. But for those fleeting moments on that October night in 1971, something lingered above Lake Constance, composed, silent, and devoid of identity. It was witnessed by men trained to observe without falling prey to imagination, and it vanished with equal quietude. It arrived, it hovered, and it departed seamlessly. Menai Air Force Base, radar visual 1968. In the early hours of October 24, 1968, the vast flatlands of North Dakota were shrouded in the cold embrace of autumn darkness. At Menai Air Force Base, home to nuclear-capable B-52 bombers and an intricate web of underground missile silos, radar screens flickered softly in the operations center. The crews were well versed in enduring long stretches of alertness, diligently monitoring military movements alongside the occasional errant signal. However, on this particular night, an unfamiliar presence emerged on the radar screen that clearly did not belong within the parameter of standard operations. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, radar operators detected a robust return from an unidentified object traversing the airspace encircling the base. This return was strikingly precise, firm, and consistent, behaving like a legitimate target rather than a fleeting anomaly. Almost instantly, reports began to pour in from security personnel stationed throughout the missile fields. Guards began relaying information about a brilliant object hovering low over the vast prairie, casting an uncanny glow that illuminated the ground beneath it. In adherence to protocol, the Air Force initiated their typical response during such perplexing occurrences. They dispatched a bomber. The B-52, already engaged in a standard training flight in the vicinity, was directed to investigate this mysterious sighting. As the crew neared the designated coordinates, they caught sight of it. A radiant object much larger than a fighter jet, glowing with an intensity of white and orange hues. Initially, it appeared stationary. Then, in a sudden flash, it surged forward, matching the bomber's speed and maintaining a parallel trajectory. Inside the B-52, the crew shared anxious glances, each fully aware of the unorthodox scenario unfolding around them. Among those on board were Major Patrick McCaslin and Captain Brad Renan, both seasoned aviators familiar with the skies. They recounted later how the object bore a structured form, its brilliance stark against the darkened canvas of night. It was neither a star nor a planet, and it certainly was not any known aircraft. Its movements exuded a purposeful intelligence, responding precisely to the bomber's maneuvers. Ground-based security teams continued to observe the object, relaying updates from various points of observation. Some guards noted that it hovered ominously near missile silos, enveloping them in an unusual luminescence. Others reported its descent toward the Earth before it inexplicably shot back into the sky at astonishing velocity. One guard, his voice taut with apprehension, relayed that the object had landed for a brief moment close to his position, emanating a brilliant glow before ascending once more. The B-52's onboard radar engaged with the object, locking onto it firmly. The readouts verified its authenticity. It was a tangible entity, moving at speeds far beyond those achievable by conventional aircraft. At one moment, the radar operator observed the object darting from one side of the screen to the other within the blink of an eye, traversing vast distances in mere fractions of a second. Visual confirmation aligned seamlessly with the radar's assessments. Whatever this phenomenon was, it was substantiated through both instruments and witnesses alike. For nearly 40 minutes, the B-52 remained under surveillance from the glowing entity. Efforts to evade the object proved futile. Every time the bomber altered its course, the object mirrored its movements closely, never engaging in a collision. The crew later articulated a profound sense of being scrutinized, as if the luminescent figure possessed a consciousness that was neither hostile nor benign, but rather undeniably calculated. Upon the return of the B-52 to base, visibly shaken yet unharmed, the incident was promptly escalated through the military's command structure. Investigators from Project Blue Book were dispatched to Maine to collect eyewitness accounts, radar data, and any possible physical remnants. In the ensuing days, they undertook interviews with the B-52's crew, radar specialists, and ground security staff. The narratives they collected were strikingly uniform. Numerous sources stationed across extensive distances had concurrently observed the same unidentified object. The radar had validated its existence. The crew of the B-52 had not only visualized it, but had diligently tracked it via their instruments, describing its distinctive shape and illumination. This was no solitary account stemming from an uncertain observer. It was an orchestrated military event involving countless trained personnel. The files from Blue Book linked to Maine illustrated the profound nature of the testimonies collected. Captain Renan's account in particular stood out vividly. He characterized the object as a large, metallic-like shape, brilliantly outlined against the obsidian sky. Others corroborated his description, unanimously asserting that it could not be mistaken for a star, planet, or any conventional aircraft. Confronted with this substantial body of evidence, Blue Book endeavored to craft a plausible explanation. Initially, analysts posited that the crew might have confused celestial objects, perhaps Venus or stars intensified by atmospheric distortion. However, the witnesses were military officers adept in navigation who regularly identified stars, expressing firm rejection of such an explanation. Next, Blue Book entertained the suggestion of meteorological phenomena. Analysts argued that temperature inversions might have created both radar irregularities and visual misperceptions. Nonetheless, the data accrued from that evening revealed no significant atmospheric inversion, and even if one had existed, it would not account for an object that maintained pace with bombers at high velocities or hovered near missile silos in clear view of multiple observers simultaneously. The investigation grew increasingly awkward. The evidence was difficult to dismiss outright. Yet the Air Force was hesitant to acknowledge a genuine unidentified entity operating above a base armed with nuclear capabilities. Ultimately, Blue Book's official findings amounted to a vague reference to stars and planets perceived under anomalous conditions, a conclusion that resonated hollowly against the backdrop of the witnesses' accounts. For those who observed the incident, this conclusion felt like an affront to their experiences. They were acutely aware of what they had witnessed. And it was not merely stars. Years later, some began to voice their indignation openly. Major McCaslin disclosed that he never reconciled himself with the official rationale, maintaining that the encounter served as undeniable evidence of an entity beyond human technological prowess. Scholars who revisited the case in subsequent decades echoed this sentiment. The incident at Minna emerged as one of the most meticulously documented cases in Blue Book history, replete with extensive transcripts, radar data, and multiple sworn declarations. Civilian analysts drew parallels to other encounters involving nuclear facilities, noting the recurrent appearance of bright luminous crafts hovering near sensitive sites, shadowing military aircraft and leaving frustrated investigators in their wake. The timing bore significance too. Throughout the latter part of the 1960s, American nuclear facilities repeatedly found themselves linked to unexplained phenomena. Similar reports echoed from Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana and F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. In each instance, unidentified objects were witnessed in proximity to missile silos, raising critical inquiries regarding their role. Were they monitoring or even probing the security of the United States' nuclear arsenal? The Minette case, however, distinguished itself due to its remarkable collection of evidence. Few occurrences encapsulated radar detection, visual sightings, and multiple eyewitness accounts with such seamless integration. By every conceivable standard, it constituted a quintessential UFO encounter. Nevertheless, Blue Book, hamstrung by its own limitations, chose not to delve deeper. The documentation was neatly filed away, joining the ranks of countless other entries lacking conclusive explanations. Yet, for those who bore witness, that particular night lingered in memory, etched indelibly in their minds. One security guard later reflected that they were aware it was something not of this realm. The enchanting presence over a missile site compelled anyone to ponder its implications. His sentiments resonate with the disquiet felt by many at Minette, a palpable sense that their formidable arsenal, symbols of human supremacy, was being surveilled by enigmatic forces. In contemporary discourse, the Minette Air Force Base radar visual case is frequently referenced by researchers as one of the most compelling citations from the Blue Book collection. It endures with the traits of reliability, trained observers, corroborated radar and visual documentation, discernible craft, coupled with an official inquiry that could not provide clarity. For the military personnel who served during that unforgettable night, the radiant object suspended over the North Dakota landscape was no mere figment of imagination. It existed, purposeful and beyond the reach of their command. Blue Book's decision to dismiss the incident may have technically locked the file away, yet it did not erase the vivid memories of those involved. Within the archives, the reports stand as a testament to a historical moment in which America's nuclear capabilities were subtly overshadowed by an obscurity that defied explanation. You've been tuned into Dreams of Disclosure. Be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss tomorrow's narrative. Fresh accounts of alien and UFO encounters await you here every single day.